Welcome to the world of Dreamside Traveler. Here, beneath the soothing sound of gentle rain, we journey through time and space, uncovering the mysteries of the past and diving into the most captivating pages of human history. This place is created for those who love exploring the world in the quiet of evening, for those who value peace while yearning to discover something new before sleep. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please give this video a like. It helps other people find our stories. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers in our club of nighttime history lovers. And the Dreamside Traveler channel will become your faithful guide to sleep. We're constantly adding new stories for your peaceful evenings. And if you have ideas about which historical topics interest you, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave comments below the video. I'm genuinely curious to know what inspires you. Now close your eyes. Feel this gentle rain outside your window. Allow yourself to relax. Our journey begins right now. The medieval village was a world of contradictions, where trust and suspicion, hope and dread lived side by side in every heart. At the crossroads of all these feelings stood one unlikely figure, the barber. He was the man with the sharpest knives, the strongest hands, and the bravest, or perhaps the most desperate, soul. He was the surgeon, the dentist, the bloodletter, the bone setter, and sometimes the only thing standing between a neighbor and the endless howl of pain. To outsiders, it might seem strange that the barber, a man known for shaving beards and trimming hair, should also be the village's chief healer. But in those days, roles were not so neatly divided. Medicine was a mystery, surgery a dangerous craft, and few had the courage or the means to pursue it. The village barber learned by doing, by watching, by listening to the stories of older barbers, or, if he was lucky, by reading scraps of advice copied by candlelight from the monks in some distant monastery. The tools of his trade were few and fearsome. Scissors and razors for hair, iron tongs for teeth, needles for sewing wounds, a bowl for catching blood, and a knife sharp enough to open an abscess or a vein. These implements hung from his belt or his walls, always within reach, always carrying the memory of yesterday's work. No one in the village could mistake the sight or the smell of the barber's shop. The metallic tang of blood, the sour musk of sweat and fear, the oily sheen of old hair and older secrets. The reputation of the barber was both blessing and curse. On market days, when the crowd swelled and the tavern filled with laughter, villagers might joke about the barber's heavy hand, the crooked scars he left, the tales of screams echoing out his open window. But in the dark of night, when a child woke screaming with pain or a wound festered beyond the reach of herbs, it was the barber's door that families knocked on, begging for help, for mercy, for relief. His role in the community was more complicated than most would admit. He was respected, yes. After all, he held the power to save a life, to end a pain, to make a cripple walk again. But he was also feared and sometimes even shunned. Children ran when he passed in the street. Women crossed themselves when he entered the church. Men who could not face their own suffering avoided his gaze, afraid he might see their weakness and call them to account. Part of this fear came from the barber's reputation for pain. His procedures, especially those involving teeth, were legendary for their brutality. The chair by his fire was a place of nightmares, a site of screams and sobs and desperate prayers. Everyone had a story. A brother who fainted, a mother who bit through her own lip, a neighbor who never quite recovered from the last visit. And yet, in a world without real doctors, the barber's hands were sometimes the only hope. Even those who hated him, who cursed him in public, came to him in private, hats in hand, eyes downcast. But the barber was not always alone in his trade. Traveling through the countryside, from market to market, came another kind of healer, the wandering doctor, the chirurgeon, the quack. These bolder souls set up their stalls under colored banners and promised miracles for every ailment. They came with chests of mysterious powders, gleaming knives, and words as slick as oil. To the desperate and the credulous, they were a last hope. To the wise, they were a source of gossip, laughter, and often danger. The itinerant doctors were a spectacle. They wore bright clothes, feathered hats, and sometimes affected foreign accents to seem more learned. With loud voices and theatrical gestures, they performed their tricks in the market square. They might pull a rotten tooth in front of a crowd, offering a handful of coins to any villager brave enough to sit in their chair. Sometimes they used clever sleight of hand, hiding the real agony behind a flash of red cloth or the smoke of burning herbs. At other times, their methods were far worse than the barber's, leaving behind broken jaws, festering wounds, or nightmares that haunted the village long after they were gone. There were stories, always stories. Some swore that a traveling doctor once cured a child's fever with nothing but a song. Others remembered the quack who pulled a tooth with such force that the poor soul's jaw never closed right again. Still others whispered of healers who sold bottles of colored water, promising it would restore lost hair, heal broken hearts, or grant a young bride the love of her new husband. By the time the truth was discovered, the quack was already over the next hill. The rivalry between the village barber and the wandering healers was real and bitter. The barber watched with tight lips as the crowds gathered around the stranger's cart, knowing that every coin spent there was a coin not spent in his own shop. He heard the tales, endured the jokes, and waited for the inevitable when the quack left. And the sick, the wounded, and the disappointed returned, asking for help, for healing, for hope. Despite all this, the barber's authority endured. He was, after all, a neighbor, someone you might meet at church or at the tavern, someone who knew your family and your story. The quacks and charlatans were gone with the wind, but the barber remained, his place secure, if sometimes lonely, at the heart of village life. Yet the barber's own training was often only a step ahead of disaster. Some learned their craft from fathers or uncles, passing down battered tools and older, darker secrets. Others apprenticed with traveling surgeons or monks, picking up new tricks, new cures, new ideas about the body and its mysteries. A few rare barbers even managed to collect books, handwritten, dog-eared, filled with diagrams of bones and veins and strange Latin phrases. These men were the pride of their villages, consulted on every ailment, envied by those who remembered a time when even a splinter meant a trip to the priest for prayers. Still, for most, the reality was much rougher. Their knowledge was patchwork, learned from trial and error, from mistakes and the wisdom of old wives' tales. They knew that blood could kill as well as heal, that pain could be survived but not ignored, that every mouth held secrets as dangerous as any wound. They were not always kind, but they were always needed. In every village, the barber's shop was a crossroads, a place of birth, of pain, of fear, and sometimes of miracles. And what of the patients, those who came to sit in the barber's chair? For them, trust was always a complicated thing. They balanced their fear of pain against their fear of something worse, sickness, isolation, even death. The barber's reputation shaped every decision. If he was gentle, people came sooner with smaller problems. If he was cruel or careless, they waited until the last possible moment, hoping for a miracle or the return of the wandering healer. Either way, every visit was a leap of faith, a wager with fate and with the limits of human endurance. Children were especially wary. The stories they heard, half true, half invention, were enough to keep them awake at night, dreading the day when a tooth would ache or a wound would fester. Parents tried to reassure them, telling tales of brave boys and clever girls who faced the barber's knives with a stiff upper lip. But the memory of a neighbor's scream, the sight of the barber's blood-stained apron, was enough to turn even the bravest heart to water. Over time, some barbers gained fame far beyond their own villages. Their skills became legendary, their names passed from town to town. Some traveled, setting up shop in bigger towns or cities, teaching younger barbers, gathering new knowledge. A few even wrote down their secrets, leaving behind battered notebooks that became prized possessions, passed from hand to hand as proof that pain could, sometimes, be conquered by wisdom. But the world was always changing. As new medicines, new tools, and new ideas crept in from distant lands, the barber's role slowly began to shift. He was no longer the only hope. He had to share his stage with apothecaries, surgeons, and real doctors. Some welcomed this change, learning all they could, striving to offer better care. Others fought it, clinging to the old ways, muttering that only a barber truly knew the secrets of the mouth, the bone, the blood. Still, in the heart of every village, the barber's chair remained. It was a place of courage, of suffering, of transformation. It was where children became adults, where neighbors became legends, where every scream and every sigh became part of a story bigger than any one life. And in the long shadow of that chair, the figure of the barber endures, a symbol of all that is terrifying, all that is necessary, and all that is human in the long, tangled history of pain. If you stayed long enough in any medieval town, sooner or later you would learn that the story of the barber and the wandering healer was not just a story of tools and treatments. It was a story of people, of pride and envy, of trust built and broken, of human weakness and the relentless hope for something better. Every village had its own barber, a man, or rarely a woman, whose life was woven into the very fabric of the place. He was more than a healer. He was a secret keeper, a witness to birth and death, the custodian of pain, the holder of confessions whispered through clenched teeth. On a market morning, you might see him in his faded apron, sharpening a knife at his doorway, trading a quick joke with the baker, or pausing to watch a group of children play, knowing that someday he would tend their wounds or face their tears. The barber's shop was more than a workplace. It was a crossroads, a confessional, and sometimes a stage. In the morning, it might be filled with the chatter of old men, sipping ale and waiting for a shave, sharing gossip and news. By afternoon, it could become a place of suffering. A child with a festering wound, a woman clutching her jaw, a farmer bleeding from a broken tooth or an accident in the field. The tools of the barber's trade, arrayed in the window or hung from pegs on the wall, were as familiar to the villagers as the church bell or the sound of the mill. And yet, for all the barber's presence, for all the moments when he was the last hope in the darkest night, his position was never quite secure. Fear and gratitude do not always go hand in hand. Many respected him in public, but crossed themselves when he passed. His touch was a necessary evil, a reminder that relief always came with a price. Some whispered that barbers were not to be fully trusted, that anyone so familiar with blood and pain might know more than he let on, might even bring bad luck or sickness by mistake or by malice. Into this delicate balance strode the wandering healers, the chirurgeons, the so-called doctors, the hawkers of miracle powders and secret cures. Their arrival was always an event, a disruption of the daily order, a festival of promises and performances. They came into town with trumpets and banners, sometimes riding brightly painted wagons, sometimes on foot with heavy satchels and quick, restless eyes. Their shows were unforgettable. In the square, before a gathering crowd, they would tell stories of faraway lands, of miraculous recoveries in Paris, of wonders learned from wise men in the East, of potions that could cure any ache or heartbreak. Some even boasted connections to royalty or letters of recommendation from bishops and lords. They wore flamboyant clothes and jewelry, each detail chosen to dazzle the eye and distract from doubt. These wandering doctors performed in ways that the barber never could. They brought out strange instruments, copper syringes, shining mirrors, saws and clamps, bottles of colored oils and powders with names no villager could pronounce. They pulled teeth on stage, coaxing volunteers with the promise of silver or a free dose of pain-killing wine. Sometimes they stitched wounds or lanced boils right in front of the crowd, working fast, talking faster, always moving, always keeping the audience on their side. But beneath the spectacle, there was danger. These men, and they were almost always men, did not stay long. They did not have to answer for their mistakes. When a wound went bad, when a jaw swelled with infection or a child died from a fever that no powder could cure, the wanderer had already moved on, leaving the barber to clean up the mess and face the fury of grieving parents. For every tale of a miracle, there was another of disaster, and the trust of the village wore thinner with every passing season. Barbers resented these outsiders, but could not help but learn from them. The best took careful note of the new tools, the strange herbs, the clever tricks. Some even bargained with the wanderers in secret, swapping knowledge or buying rare supplies. The bravest young barbers sometimes left home, following a wandering surgeon for a few months, hoping to return with new skills and a reputation that would outlast the memory of pain. For most villagers, the question of whom to trust was a daily struggle. They weighed the risks with every ache and every injury. Was it better to see the barber, whose hands were known, whose mistakes were feared but understood, or the stranger with promises of magic and the risk of disaster? Parents debated this in whispers. Couples argued by candlelight. Old men shook their heads and muttered about the old days, when faith was placed in God and in local hands, not in painted men from the next shire. Sometimes the lines blurred. The barber himself might become a wanderer for a time, traveling to fairs and markets, learning new methods and bringing home stories and scars in equal measure. Others built alliances, inviting a famous surgeon to share a demonstration in the town square, hoping to boost their own reputation, or finally learn the secret to a less painful extraction or a more effective salve. The shadow of charlatans, the true frauds, who sold colored water as cure-all, who pocketed coins and vanished into the night, hung over every healer, honest or not. These men made the villagers wary of all medicine, and the shame and suspicion they sowed often made the barber's work even harder. Even those with the purest intentions could not escape the cloud of doubt cast by a single disaster. And yet the barber endured. He was there when the festivals ended, when the banners came down, when the music faded, and the square was empty but for a few scraps of colored cloth and a lingering sense of disappointment. He stayed when the wounds festered, when the teeth shattered, when the pain returned. He sat beside the dying, comforted the mourning, accepted the blame and the fear and the faint, lingering gratitude. Over time, the villagers learned to see him not as a miracle worker, but as a fellow traveler on the long, hard road of survival. The barber's authority rested not just on skill, but on memory. He was part of the village's collective story. He knew who had survived smallpox and who had lost a child, whose jaw had healed well and whose had not, who still owed him a chicken for last winter's bloodletting, who brought him honey or bread in thanks for a successful surgery. His trade was woven into the web of favors and feuds, secrets and silences that held the village together. He was also, in a strange way, a symbol of hope. For all the pain he brought, for all the fear his tools inspired, he represented the possibility of relief. When the pain was worst, when the fever would not break, when the ache in the jaw threatened madness, even the proudest, most suspicious soul might finally come to his door, humbled by the truth that sometimes only a neighbor's hands can save you. The children who once fled from him grew up to trust him with their own families. Some even apprenticed with him, learning the craft, the rituals, the rules that balanced mercy and necessity. The best barbers became local legends. Their names were spoken with respect at the fireside, their tools passed down through generations, each new pair of hands adding new scars and new stories to the old, unchanging role. Still, the world was always changing. The best barbers watched for travelers from the city, eager to hear news of new medicines, new laws, new discoveries. Some sent letters or even traveled themselves, returning home with bottles of imported tincture or a pamphlet describing how to cut pain with clove oil or laudanum. Others clung to the old ways, insisting that nothing could replace the wisdom of experience and the proof of a life spent at the heart of every family's joys and tragedies. Through it all, the villagers learned to live with their doubts. They learned to trust a little and to fear a lot. They learned to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst. And in every ache, every scream, every small victory over pain, they learned to honor the men and women who, for better or worse, held the sharpest knives and the deepest secrets at the center of their lives. So, if you had lived in that time, whom would you have trusted with your pain? Would you have risked everything for the chance at a miracle, or put your faith in the steady hands of the barber you known all your life? Would you have turned away from the charlatan's song, or listened just in case the cure was real? In the end, that choice, like the pain itself, belonged to each villager alone. And as the years turned and new stories were added to the old, the barber's chair remained, a silent witness to every hope, every fear, every moment of relief or regret. The wandering doctors came and went, the charlatans vanished, but the barber endured, always waiting, always ready, holding the balance between suffering and survival in hands that, for all their scars, never forgot what it meant to heal. Evening is falling on the village, and as the sun disappears behind the distant fields, the barber closes up his little shop. The last of the children are called indoors. The day's work is finished, and the air hums with the gentle, constant memory of pain that has touched every home. This is a world where suffering is a neighbor, where every adult can remember the feel of the barber's chair, the weight of dread in their stomach, and the hope that the hands gripping their jaw would show mercy rather than mistake. Yet, for all the fear and caution, the barber's place in the village is irreplaceable. He is the one who sits with the dying and the newly born, who knows every secret ailment, every hidden shame. He sees the bravest farmers whimper, the toughest mothers weep, the proudest men faint. He is a mirror to the truth that, beneath pride and rumor, everyone is made of the same fragile flesh and bone. For those who come to the barber's chair, the experience is unforgettable. Some enter with bravado, joking loudly, but their laughter falters as they settle in. The sight of the iron tongs, the rough cloths, the basin for blood, all strip away pretense. Others come quietly desperate, their courage already spent by weeks of pain and sleeplessness. The barber meets each with the same steady eyes. He knows the story before it is told, a tooth that aches, a wound that will not heal, a fever that has outlasted every prayer. In that small room, trust is a currency more valuable than gold. Every patient offers up their pain, their pride, their hope for relief, and in return the barber gives what comfort he can. Sometimes a rough hand squeezed in solidarity, sometimes a whispered promise that it will be over soon, sometimes nothing but the steady presence of another human being willing to face suffering head-on. It is in this crucible of pain and patience that the barber earns his true reputation. The children who once hid from him grow up to bring their own children for help. Old men, whose mouths are mostly empty now, still come for a shave and to share memories of long-ago days when the world was young and their courage was untested. The barber himself becomes a fixture in their stories, a figure both feared and beloved, a necessary presence, a witness to every joy and every loss. But the barber is not alone in the landscape of village medicine. The legacy of the wandering healer still lingers, shaping the way people think about trust and risk. Some families keep a bottle of miracle water on a shelf purchased years ago from a bright-eyed stranger with a quick tongue. Some still use the salves and poultices taught by traveling chirurgeons, convinced that a new recipe can ease an old wound. There is a certain pride in having tried every cure, in knowing every option, in refusing to give up hope, even when hope is as thin as a razor's edge. Yet the scars of disappointment run deep. For every story of a miracle, there are two of loss. Villagers remember the night a wandering healer left a child worse than he found her, the time a promised cure turned to poison, the moment a trusted stranger vanished with a purse of coins and left only pain behind. These memories make the community wary. They teach the young to look first to the people they know, to weigh each promise carefully, to trust only after all else has failed. The church, too, has a role in this web of trust and fear. The priest is often called to bless the barber's tools, to pray for patience before a difficult procedure, to comfort the bereaved when healing fails. In some villages, the priest and the barber are friends, sharing a quiet understanding of what it means to be asked for help when there are no easy answers. In others, there is tension, a struggle over who holds the true power to save, to comfort, to guide souls through the valley of shadow and pain. And what of the barbers themselves? Their lives are marked by both routine and risk. Most begin as apprentices, learning first to sweep the floors and sharpen the knives, then to mix the herbal washes and sew rough stitches in skin. Only with time do they earn the right to wield the iron tongs, to open a vein, to set a broken bone, or draw a rotten tooth. The training is brutal, sometimes cruel, always incomplete. Mistakes are inevitable, and every barber carries the memory of his first failure. A wound that did not heal, a scream that did not end, a life lost on his watch. Still, the best barbers grow with every loss. They become quick with a joke, gentle with a child, wise enough to know when to act and when to wait. Some are fierce, refusing to back down from any challenge. Others are cautious, always seeking second opinions, never too proud to ask advice from an old midwife or a well-traveled herbalist. The barber's pride is tempered by the constant reminder that every body is different, every wound its own riddle, every cure a gamble. For the villagers, choosing whom to trust is always an act of hope, and sometimes of desperation. When a child burns with fever, a mother will try anything. Barber, priest, wandering doctor, wise woman, sometimes all in the same night. When a wound festers, a man will swallow his pride and beg for the sharpest knife, the strongest hand, the most bitter potion. Each decision is a measure of faith, in science, in prayer, in luck, in the stubborn will to survive. These choices shape the village itself. Over time, Stories grow around the barber's shop, tales of near miracles and narrow escapes. The man whose jaw was saved by a poultice of moss and vinegar. The child who survived a fever thanks to a rare herb brought by a passing healer. The woman whose life was spared by the priest's prayers and the barber's skill working together. Each story adds a thread to the tapestry of community, weaving together the old and the new, the trusted and the doubted, the hope of magic and the comfort of what is known. As the world outside the village changes, news travels on muddy roads and in the mouths of merchants and minstrels. Stories of city surgeons using silk and silver, of foreign doctors with tiny knives and gentle manners, begin to filter in. Some villagers dream of better days, when pain will be rare and cures as easy as a prayer. Others cling to the familiar, to the steady presence of the barber who has never failed them, at least not fatally. The barber himself is caught between pride and uncertainty. He longs to learn more, to ease suffering with less pain, to see his craft recognized as true medicine. Sometimes he writes letters to bigger towns, begging for books or tools, seeking answers he cannot find in the whispers of the old women or the pages of his father's battered journal. When he succeeds, when a patient heals quickly, when a child's fever breaks, he allows himself a quiet smile. When he fails, he buries the grief deep, letting it shape him into a better, if sadder, healer. In the end, the true mark of the barber's worth is found not in his tools or his knowledge, but in the trust he builds, patient by patient, scar by scar. He becomes part of every family's story, a figure as constant as the church bell, as necessary as the coming of spring. When he dies, his passing is mourned by all, his stories retold for generations. His successor, whether son or apprentice or stranger, inherits not just the chair and the tools, but the heavy burden of memory, of hope, of fear and faith intertwined. And so the cycle continues. The wandering healers come and go, promising marvels, stirring hopes, sometimes leaving disaster in their wake. The charlatans vanish with the dawn, taking their empty bottles and cheap tricks to the next unlucky town. But the barber remains, his place as fixed as the stones in the churchyard. His reputation is never perfect, never secure, but it is real, built from 1,000 acts of courage, compassion, and endurance. The village learns, with every generation, that pain is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is the teacher, sometimes the test, sometimes the price for another day of laughter, of labor, of living in the fragile shelter of community. The barber, more than anyone, knows this. His hands hold the history of every smile, every scar, every whispered prayer for relief. If you were to walk through the village as darkness settles and the fires burn low, you would see the barber's window, the faint glow of candlelight, the shadow of a man at work. You would know in that moment that for all the fear, for all the rumors and risks, there is nowhere safer to bring your pain. Because in this world, as in all others, the truest healing comes not from magic or miracles, but from the patient, practiced hands of someone who has learned to carry hope through the hardest nights. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You are not where you are now. There is no electricity humming in the walls, no bright screens, no dentist's chair gleaming white and clean beneath soft lights. Instead, you find yourself in a world built of wood and earth, smoke and wind. A small medieval village where everything you know about comfort, medicine, and hope is turned upside down. The year could be any year, so long as it is before the world learned the secrets of anesthesia, antibiotics, and the gentle hum of modern science. You are just another soul in this place, neither rich nor poor, no different from your neighbors, except for the ache that has been growing in your jaw. At first, it was just a twinge, a sharp pinch when you chewed the bread that your wife baked or tried to smile at the laughter of your children. But now the ache has become a constant drum, a deep, burning pain that wakes you in the night, follows you through the fields, makes every meal a test of endurance. Let's pause here. Breathe in and let yourself truly feel it. Imagine the pain, how it clouds your thoughts, sharpens your temper, colors every moment of your day. Imagine the fear that settles in your belly as you realize this isn't going away. Every story you have heard about toothaches, the ones that led to fever, to madness, to death, suddenly feel much closer. Maybe you tell yourself that you can endure it, that it will pass, that you are stronger than your pain. Maybe, deep down, you know you are only pretending. In this world, you have two choices, and neither one is easy. This is where I invite you, listener, to truly step into the story. What would you do? Option 1, you wait. You grit your teeth, what's left of them, and bear it. You chew on leather straps, press cold river stones to your cheek, try every herbal remedy whispered by neighbors and wise women. Mint leaves, garlic, honey, poultices made from mud or old bread. You pray sometimes to saints, sometimes just to the sky for the pain to pass. And as the days wear on, the pain does not leave you. It sharpens, it spreads. Sleep becomes a memory. Eating is agony. Sometimes, in the dark of night, you wonder if it would be easier to simply give up, to let the fever take you, to surrender to the kind of pain that no man can bear forever. Option 2, you walk trembling to the barber's door. Maybe you go alone, teeth clenched and jaw set. Maybe a friend comes with you or your family follows, their eyes wide with worry and hope. You sit in the battered wooden chair, feeling every splinter, every old stain left by others who have suffered here before you. The barber does not promise comfort. He promises only action, only the chance of relief at a terrible cost. You see the iron tongs, the poker in the fire, the bucket half filled with bloody rags. You know what is coming. Will you let him do it? Will you trust those hands, that room, the promise that pain can be ended, if only you can survive the ordeal? Or maybe, just maybe, you choose a third path, a desperate gamble. Perhaps you hear that a wandering healer is passing through town, promising a painless cure, a miracle tonic, a secret handed down from distant lands. Do you put your faith in the stranger, risking your life on hope and charm and the unknown? Do you trust the wisdom of the charlatan, the promise of magic over the rough skill of the barber you have known all your life? Let's sit with these questions. Imagine the moment of decision. Your mouth is burning. Your body is weak with lack of sleep and fear. You see your children watching you, learning from your courage or your hesitation. You remember the screams you heard last week, your neighbor, your friend, maybe even your own parent, and you wonder if you have the strength to do what they did. Would you face the chair, or would you run from it? Would you trust the steady hands of the barber despite all the horror stories? Or would you put your faith in the unknown, the wandering doctor with his strange bottles and smooth words? Or would you cling to endurance, to the hope that pain might one day pass on its own, that your body might heal, that you can outlast the suffering if you just hold on long enough? Pause right here and really ask yourself, what would you choose? Would you be the brave one, the desperate one, the hopeful one, or the skeptic? There is no easy answer. Every path is marked by pain, by risk, by the possibility of regret. Now imagine what comes next. You make your choice. Let's say you go to the barber. The moment you sit in the chair, your heart pounds so loudly you can hear nothing else. You watch as the barber checks his tools, wipes his hands on a stained apron, gives you one last, steady look. He asks if you're ready, not if you're willing, but if you are ready to face what comes. And then the procedure begins. The clamp of iron, the twist, the yank, the agony that drowns out everything but itself. Maybe you scream, maybe you faint, maybe you clutch the arms of the chair until your knuckles bleed. When it's over, you are changed. You carry the memory of that pain for the rest of your life. You remember the taste of blood, the smell of burnt flesh, the way the world went silent for a moment as the pain finally broke. But relief is not guaranteed. Infection can set in, fever can take hold. Some survive and find a new appreciation for the quiet absence of pain. Others do not. Some are haunted by the experience, by nightmares of the chair and the tools, by the knowledge that their relief came at such a terrible price. Or perhaps you chose to wait, to endure. Days blur together. The pain steals your joy, your appetite, your hope. Your family worries. Your friends visit less often. The world narrows to the throbbing in your mouth. You try every remedy, every prayer, but nothing works. Sometimes pain makes you irritable or cruel. Sometimes it leaves you too tired to speak. Your life becomes smaller, your dreams more distant. In rare moments, the pain fades, just a little. You celebrate quietly, afraid that any happiness will call the pain back again. And what if you chose the stranger, the miracle cure? Sometimes the medicine is nothing more than sweetened wine, a trick played on the desperate. Sometimes the procedure goes wrong and you are left worse than before. Occasionally, by luck or true skill, you find a measure of relief. But it always comes with a question. Was it worth the risk? Can you ever truly trust someone who disappears the moment the sun rises and the crowd disperses? This is the heart of the question. What would you do if you were truly there, if the pain was not just a story, but your own body, your own fear, your own risk and hope? Would you trust the old ways or gamble on something new? Would you endure, or would you beg for relief, no matter the cost? Let yourself imagine the faces of those around you. Your parents, your children, your neighbors, all watching, all remembering. In a world where everyone knows pain, where every decision is a test of character, every act of courage is also an act of survival. There is no shame in fear. There is only the reality that pain touches everyone, and the choices we make in the face of it become part of our story. So tell me, what would you do? Would you step into the barber's chair, trust the hands that have helped and hurt so many before you? Would you try your luck with a wandering doctor, hoping for a miracle but risking disaster? Or would you wait, grit your teeth, and pray for morning, hoping that the pain will pass and you will be spared the ordeal that has haunted so many others? I invite you, listener, to leave your answer in the comments, to share your thoughts, your fears, your hopes. If you have ever faced pain, real pain, the kind that makes the world shrink, what did you do? What would you do if you lived in a time when relief was a gamble, a question of trust, a choice between different kinds of suffering? Your story, your answer matters, because history is not just the tale of kings and battles and inventions. It is the story of ordinary people facing impossible choices. It is your story, too. Let's stay in this moment just a little longer. Imagine, really imagine, that ache in your jaw that doesn't let you sleep, doesn't let you think, doesn't let you be yourself. Maybe you are young and strong, the sort everyone expects to bear pain without complaint. Or maybe you are older, tired, afraid of what another night without rest might mean for your heart. Maybe you are a parent, watching your child flinch at every bite, helpless in the face of their silent suffering. The choice is still before you. Do you endure, or do you risk everything on the hope that someone else's hands might save you? Walk with me through the village. Listen as the night falls and the world grows smaller around every lit window. The pain in your mouth sharpens with every hour, and the decision you must make presses harder with each tick of the old wooden clock. You hear in the distance the echo of a cry, someone else in the grip of their own torment, perhaps already seated in the barber's dreaded chair. How does that sound make you feel? Is it a warning or a promise that the pain might finally end? Maybe you seek counsel from those you trust. Your mother, her hair streaked with gray, remembers the time she braved the barber's tongs and lived to laugh about it. Eventually. She tells you to be brave, but you see the shadow in her eyes as she touches the line of an old scar beneath her jaw. Your father insists he endured worse, chewing on sticks, biting down on the bitterest root he could find. But even he looks away when you mention the tooth that will not stop aching. You realize, suddenly, that everyone has faced this choice in some form. The stories are stitched into every family, carried like secret scars. Now imagine the village square in the cold gray of morning. The market is just setting up, and you see a stranger, one of those wandering doctors, setting out his stall. The people gather around, drawn by the promise of something new, something that might be better than the pain they know. The doctor's voice is loud, full of certainty. He gestures to his mysterious bottles, his shining tools. You feel a flicker of hope, but also suspicion. Is he a miracle worker or a charlatan? Do you trust his showmanship, his practiced hands, the crowd's excitement? Or do you turn away, telling yourself that a true cure cannot come from someone who will be gone by nightfall? Let's turn that question over together. Picture yourself taking a step forward, asking the doctor about your pain. He smiles, looks you over, presses on your jaw. He promises his tonic will ease the ache, that his powder will keep fever away. For a price, he offers to pull the tooth right there, before the gathered crowd. Can you imagine standing there, heart pounding, fear and embarrassment battling with hope? What would you do if every eye in the market was on you, waiting to see if you would scream or endure? Would you take the chance? Or would you back away, clutching your coin and your pain, telling yourself you'll decide tomorrow? Maybe instead you find yourself standing before the barber's door. It's early, the air smells of bread and wood smoke. You hesitate, hand hovering at the latch, rehearsing what you might say, how you might plead for gentleness, for luck, for a swift end. The barber opens the door and looks you up and down. His face is tired. He's seen this 1,000 times. Does it comfort you, knowing he has survived so many screams, so many failures? Or does it make your fear sharper, more real? Would you rather trust the hands that have known so much suffering? Or risk the unknown for a miracle that might never come? Let's complicate the picture even more. Suppose the pain is not yours, but your child's. Imagine the way your heart twists as you see them cry, the desperate need to do something, anything, to make it stop. Now the decision is heavier. Would you risk the barber's chair for your child? Hold them steady while the iron tongs close in? Would you search the fields for rare herbs, travel miles to find a healer whose reputation is whispered on the wind? Would you pray harder, bargain more desperately, endure your own pain if it could spare them even a single hour of theirs? Perhaps you would try every remedy first. You mash garlic and honey together, smear it along the gums. You heat stones by the fire and wrap them in cloth, pressing them to the cheek. You boil mint leaves and sage, watch the steam rise and hope it carries the pain away. When none of it works, your world shrinks to a point. Just you and the pain, just the memory of every story you've ever heard. Would you take the risk then? Or would you still wait, hoping for a sign, for a miracle, for some magic that hasn't arrived yet? What if you wait too long? The pain grows worse. The jaw swells, fever comes. Your mind is foggy, you drift in and out of dreams. In your fever, you remember other choices. The neighbor who went to the barber and lived. The uncle who died because he waited too long. The stories of ghosts who come back for their stolen teeth. Would you regret your hesitation? Or would you find comfort in the knowledge that, at least, you chose your own fate, faced the pain on your own terms? Let's step back just for a moment and look at the world from above. See how every window in the village glows with the same fear, the same hope. Every person you know is a survivor of some pain, some decision. The old women in the corner whisper about the barbers they've known, about the miracle healers who came and went, about the children lost and saved. The men nod gravely, remembering the moments when they, too, sat in the chair or waited in dread. The children listen, wide-eyed, learning early that pain is part of life. That bravery is measured not just in battle, but in the quiet moments of endurance and hope. If you look closely, you'll see the ways people try to prepare themselves for suffering. They tie lucky charms around their wrists, pray to saints and ancestors, carry bits of bone or silver in their pockets. They tell stories about those who endured the barber's chair without a sound, who spat blood and laughter at the same time, who walked out stronger, or never walked out again. They learn that survival is not just about strength, but about choice, about knowing when to endure and when to ask for help. Now take a breath and return to yourself. The pain is real, the choice is real. What do you do? There is no one to judge, no right or wrong answer. There is only the truth of your own fear, your own hope, your own will to survive. If you chose to risk the barber's chair, imagine the aftermath. The exhaustion, the relief, the gratitude for a world suddenly quiet, for a meal eaten without agony, for a night of sleep unbroken by pain. Maybe you carry a scar, a story, a new respect for the limits of your own endurance. Maybe you share your story with others, comforting them when their time comes. If you chose to wait, to bear the pain as long as you could, imagine how the world shifts around you. You grow quieter, more withdrawn. The pain changes you, makes you see the world through a different lens. When relief finally comes, if it comes, you carry a new understanding of what it means to endure, of the way pain shapes every thought, every action, every dream. And if you chose the wanderer, the stranger with his bag of potions and promises, imagine what it feels like to hope against hope. Maybe you find relief, maybe only regret, but always, always, you are changed by the act of choosing. This is the heart of the story, the place where your experience meets the long chain of human endurance. Your pain is both unique and shared, a thread woven into the great tapestry of survival. The choices you make matter, not just to you, but to everyone who listens, who remembers, who wonders what they would do in your place. So, as you reflect on this, I invite you once more. What would you choose and why? Would you risk it all for a chance at relief, or would you trust in time, in prayer, in luck? Would you let someone else hold your fate in their hands, or keep it close, no matter the cost? Share your thoughts, your stories, your fears. Let others know that they are not alone, that pain is a companion to all, and that the courage to choose, whatever you decide, is something to be honored. Leave a comment, tell your tale. Add your voice to the long, unbroken line of those who have faced suffering and survived. Because history is not finished. It is lived every day by people like you, by the choices you make, by the courage you show, by the hope you refuse to surrender, even when the night is long and the pain is fierce. Let's slow down now, let the night settle, and listen to the silence that follows a hard question. Maybe you're sitting by the fire, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, feeling the ache in your own jaw, a memory, a warning, or just the echo of this story. The village outside is quiet, but not at peace. Even when the pain is gone, its memory lingers. That's what it means to be human, to carry yesterday's suffering in today's choices, to weigh fear and hope against each other, to wonder, what if? What if I had chosen differently? What if I had been braver, or more patient, or less afraid? Imagine a little more. The next day, the whole village knows what you chose. Maybe you walked to the barber's door, pale and shaking, and every eye followed you. Maybe you waited, clinging to hope and to silence, and the ones you love watched with worry but said nothing. In this world, pain is never just your own. It is part of the village, part of the rhythm of fields and seasons, births and deaths, joy and endurance. Your choice becomes a story, retold in whispers and glances, shaping the way others face their own pain. How does that make you feel? Is it comfort, or does it add another weight to the burden? Think about the children watching, the elders remembering, the neighbors quietly hoping you will make it through. What would you want them to learn from your courage, or your patience, or your fear? Would you tell them to trust in old hands or to risk everything for a miracle? Would you teach them that pain is something to be endured or something to be fought at any cost? Maybe you wish for something softer, something kinder, a world where no one has to make these choices alone. Pause again. Let yourself feel the texture of these questions. There are no easy answers, only the knowledge that your choice is real and that it matters. That is what binds all of us to the long line of people who came before, who survived in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. The pain of one is the pain of many, and every story is a lesson, a warning, a lantern held up to light the way for those still waiting in the dark. Now let's walk into the days after your choice. If you face the barber, maybe you heal quickly. The pain fades and you discover a new, sharp gratitude for simple things, a slice of bread, a laugh that does not hurt, a night of undisturbed sleep. But there's more. Each time you look in the mirror, each time you run your tongue over a healed gum or a gap where a tooth once was, you remember. The memory is never gentle. Sometimes you dream of iron tongs and burning pain. Sometimes you feel a strange pride, the knowledge that you did what was needed, that you endured. Or perhaps things do not go well. The wound festers, the fever comes. You are cared for by your family, your friends. They bring you broth, light candles, whisper prayers. The village gathers around you, not always physically, but in spirit. They remember their own nights of fear, their own brushes with the barber's tools. In these moments, you see the invisible web that holds your community together, a net of empathy, woven from suffering and hope. If you waited, if you chose endurance over action, your days blur together. The world grows quieter, the colors dim. You learn to measure your life by moments between pain, by the brief spells of relief that come and go without warning. Sometimes the ache lessens, and you wonder if you were right to wait. Sometimes it grows, and you regret not risking everything for a chance at relief. But even in your doubt, you are never truly alone. Others have waited before you, others will wait after. Your struggle becomes a kind of silent courage, a gift to those who fear they cannot last another day. And if you trusted the wandering healer, your fate is uncertain. Maybe his remedy works and the pain fades, and you find yourself believing in miracles again. Or maybe nothing changes, and you join the chorus of voices warning others to beware of easy promises. Sometimes, hope is all you have. Sometimes, hope is the hardest thing to hold on to. Wherever your story leads, it does not end with the pain. There are days when you tell your story to others, at the hearth, in the fields, over bread and soup. You speak of fear, of courage, of regret, of gratitude. You share what you learned. That pain is a teacher, that endurance has its limits, that sometimes trust is the bravest choice of all. Your story becomes another thread in the village's tapestry, woven with laughter and tears, with warnings and hope. Let's turn this question back to you, listener. Can you remember a time when you faced pain, not just in your body, but in your life? Maybe it was not a toothache, but a heartbreak, a loss, a fear that would not let you go. What did you do? Did you wait, hoping for change? Did you risk everything on a chance, a person, a promise? Did you find comfort in the hands of someone you trusted, or did you bear your suffering in silence? Every answer is true. Every answer is brave. There is something beautiful in the way suffering connects us. It humbles us, makes us gentle with each other, reminds us that everyone is carrying something unseen. When we share our stories of pain, of survival, of choice, we offer a hand to those who are still in the middle of their own struggle. We say, "You are not alone. I have been there too." So here, at the end of this story, I invite you again to share your thoughts. What would you have done truly? Would you take the seat in the barber's chair, or would you wait, holding out for another path? Would you trust the hands you know, or gamble on hope? And what would you want others to learn from your answer? Leave a comment if you feel moved. Tell us not just what you would do, but how you feel about these choices. Do you judge the people of the past for their fears, or do you see yourself in their hesitation and their hope? Does imagining their pain make your own feel smaller? Or does it bring a new sense of kinship, a reminder that time does not change the heart as much as we like to think? Let this be a space not just for answers, but for empathy, for honesty, for uncertainty, for the shared experience of being human in a world that is often hard and sometimes cruel, but always full of people searching for comfort, for relief, for connection. If you have faced pain, if you have made hard choices, let your story join the others here. If you have not, but you can imagine it, let your voice be one of compassion, of support for those who have. Because every story matters. Every answer, every hesitation, every brave act of trust or endurance is a part of the history we share. Not just as people who once lived in dark villages with aching teeth, but as people who live today, facing different pains, making different choices, but always looking for the same things: relief, hope, and a hand to hold when the night grows long. So, what would you do, really? And what do you hope the next person will do when their time comes? Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and remember, history is not just what happened, but what is happening right now in the hearts and minds of everyone who listens, who wonders, who cares. There is a world hidden beneath the pain, a world woven from whispers, wildflowers, and hope that never quite dies. In the long centuries before science could promise real relief, magic and ritual grew up around the ache in every jaw, the fever in every mouth. For those who could not face the barber's iron, or for whom the pain always returned, these spells and charms were not just traditions. They were lifelines, woven with the thread of longing and a stubborn refusal to surrender. Picture the village at dusk, fields washed in the last gold of sunlight, smoke curling from chimneys, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and wet earth. Somewhere, a child cries softly, her tooth throbbing with every heartbeat. The mother's hands are gentle but strong as she guides her daughter to the hearth, where the oldest woman in the family sits with a bowl of strange-smelling herbs and a candle stub burning low. There will be no visit to the barber tonight. Instead, they turn to older, quieter ways. The rituals begin with words. In a world where reading is a rare skill, spoken language is everything. There are secret chants, half-remembered lines passed from mother to child, muttered in the dark or whispered into a handful of salt. Some believe that if you tell the pain a story, naming it, shaming it, tricking it, it will leave you for someone else. Others use riddles, speaking directly to the aching tooth. Tooth, tooth, do not bite, do not ache, go to the woods, find a root, leave my child alone tonight. The words are not always logical, not always the same, but their power is real to those who need to believe. Alongside the words are the gestures, the small, repeated acts that form the skeleton of every spell. The tying of a red thread around the wrist, the burning of a strand of hair in the fire, the marking of a cross on the cheek with soot or chalk. Some mothers spit 3 times over their child's head, making the sign of the cross each time. Then blow softly on the swollen jaw. Others slip a tooth that has fallen out beneath the pillow, exchanging it for a coin or a small stone, a trade with the tooth spirits, who are said to live between the cracks in the floor or the shadows under the bed. Herbs play a central role in these ancient battles with pain. In the kitchen, bundles of dried sage and mint, chamomile and yarrow hang from the rafters, waiting for their moment. A pinch of powdered clove is pressed into a cavity, its scent strong and spicy, numbing the flesh for a little while. Willow bark, chewed until bitter, is said to draw the ache out of the bone. Garlic, pounded and wrapped in cloth, is tied against the cheek, its warmth seeping into the skin. Sometimes the mere act of preparing these remedies is a comfort, a promise that something is being done, even if the pain remains. And there are objects, amulets and charms, tokens of hope that travel from pocket to pocket, hand to hand. A silver coin worn on a string around the neck, a fragment of bone carved with a secret mark, a sprig of rue or wormwood tucked into the bedclothes. In some villages, a tooth lost in childhood is buried at the foot of an ancient tree, with the promise that as the tree grows, the child will be spared future pain. In others, the first tooth to fall out is thrown onto the roof, and a wish is made for strong, healthy teeth to come. Even the tooth fairy, a story familiar to many, has roots in these old customs. Though here she is less a gentle sprite than a cunning spirit to be appeased with gifts. Folk healers, wise women, herbwives, sometimes even old men with a reputation for knowing things, are called upon when pain grows fierce. Their methods are a blend of prayer and practical knowledge, superstition and careful observation. They might light a candle and watch the way the flame flickers, searching for signs. They listen to the sound of the child's breathing, touch the skin for fever, ask careful questions about what has been eaten and what has been dreamed. Their remedies are part blessing, part science, part performance, each one as much about calming the mind as easing the body. The line between magic and medicine is thin and ever-shifting. Sometimes, a poultice of mashed herbs really does ease the pain, as modern science would later confirm. Other times, it is the ritual itself, the careful attention, the gentle hands, the confidence in the healer's voice, that brings relief, even if only for a moment. Hope is a powerful medicine, and belief can dull the sharpest ache, if only for a while. There are stories, of course, always stories, about rituals that worked and rituals that went wrong. The woman whose toothache vanished after she buried a bit of bread at the crossroads at midnight. The boy whose pain grew worse after he spat into a well, breaking an old taboo. The man who swore by the power of carrying a wolf's tooth, only to lose all his teeth in old age. These tales are told and retold, shaping the way each generation faces its own pain, teaching children to respect both the power and the limits of magic. And there are the tooth spirits, mysterious beings blamed for aches and fevers, for sudden sharp pains that come and go. Some say they are tiny, mischievous creatures who sneak into mouths at night, looking for gaps and cracks to hide in. Others believe they are the ghosts of ancestors, reminding the living of old promises and forgotten debts. In some places, it is customary to leave a bit of food by the hearth or a bowl of milk by the window as an offering to these spirits, in hopes that they will spare the family another sleepless night. Every family, every village has its own variations, its own special rituals and stories. Some believe in rubbing a rusty nail against the tooth, then hammering the nail into a tree, transferring the pain to the wood, which will bear it in silence. Others whisper that pain can be thrown away if you walk to the edge of the field at dawn and spit into the wind, repeating the right words. These rituals may not always work, but they give people something to do, a sense of control in a world where so much is uncertain and frightening. What really works? Modern hindsight can separate the wheat from the chaff, clove and willow. It turns out, do contain real painkillers, and salt water helps keep wounds clean. But even the most outlandish rituals offer something precious. Comfort, community, a way to turn fear into action. To be seen, to be cared for, to believe that someone is fighting the pain with you. These are medicines as old as suffering itself. If you listen to the elders as they talk by the fire, you'll hear pride in their voices. "I never saw the barber," boasts one. "I used only garlic and my mother's prayers." Another swears by the power of nettle tea, the blessing of a certain saint, the strength of an old charm tied to his bedpost. They share recipes and stories, laughter and warnings, weaving a tapestry of memory that holds the community together. Even the skeptics, those who trust more in steel than in spells, will admit that sometimes it's the kindness of a neighbor, the warmth of a hand, that makes all the difference. And perhaps that is the truest magic of all. The power of hope, of belief, of rituals shared across centuries and continents. When pain comes, and it always does, it is these small acts, these words and herbs and stories that hold the darkness at bay. Even when they fail, they give meaning to the struggle, a sense that no one suffers alone. So next time you touch your cheek and feel only comfort, think for a moment of all those who came before, who faced the same ache with courage and creativity. Their magic may have been humble, their remedies simple, but their hope is a legacy we still carry, hidden in every smile. Let's slip deeper into the hush of that ancient world, where the boundary between magic and reality was thinner than a spider's web. In this half-shadow, every pain and every hope had its own story, every household its private ritual, and every healer their secret blend of wisdom and wonder. Toothache, more than almost any other torment, belonged to the realm of both body and spirit. When the pain came, there was never just one answer. There was a whole universe of spells, charms, and whispered bargains that offered, if not a cure, at least a sense of purpose and connection. Imagine a chilly spring morning. Dew lies thick on the fields, and the world is gray and silent. In one small cottage at the edge of the village, a mother wakes early, her daughter tossing in bed, flushed with pain. The girl's jaw is swollen, her eyes dull with fever. The mother could take her to the barber, but she hesitates, knowing too well the horror of that chair. Instead, she sets a kettle on the fire, gathers herbs from a bundle above the hearth, and kneels beside her daughter, murmuring the same words her own mother once whispered to her. First comes the smoke chase. The mother burns dried sage and yarrow, letting the sweet, sharp smoke drift over the child's face. With each waft, she chants softly, "As this smoke rises, so the pain will leave, climbing higher, leaving the body clean." She closes her eyes, imagining the ache uncoiling, drawn upward by the scent, vanishing into the thatch above. Whether or not the ritual truly eases the pain, it gives the mother and child a moment of peace, a breath of hope in the gray of the dawn. Next is the ritual of the tooth-buyer. In some villages, a lost tooth must be sold, not simply thrown away. The mother takes a small coin, sometimes copper, sometimes just a shiny pebble, and presses it into her daughter's hand. Together they bury the tooth in the garden, reciting, "Old tooth for the earth, new tooth for the sky. Let the pain be gone, let the new come in." It's a contract, a promise that the pain will not linger, that something new and healthy will grow in its place. Over time, children come to see the garden not just as a place of food, but as a silent keeper of their childhood aches and hopes. There are rites for every season, every kind of suffering. When a tooth throbs in winter, some families walk to the riverbank, break the ice, and rinse their mouths with the freezing water, to shock the pain out. In the height of summer, they gather wild mint and chew it slowly, believing the coolness will chase the fire from their bones. On the night of a new moon, it is common to leave a slice of bread on the windowsill, sprinkled with salt and a few drops of the sufferer's blood, an offering to the unseen spirits who prowl when darkness is deepest. And always there is the art of the spoken spell. Some incantations are simple: "Pain, pain, fly away, do not come another day." Others are longer, rhythmic, filled with repetition and rhyme. Healers believe that words have weight, that each syllable uttered with intent can tip the scales between agony and relief. Even the act of telling the tooth its own fate, promising to care for it, to remember its strength, to honor its service, has a strange power. The pain is given meaning. It becomes a companion to be reasoned with, not just an enemy to be feared. The objects used in these rituals are treasures in their own right. Every family keeps a collection. A tooth stone smooth from years of handling, a handful of acorns marked with tiny crosses, scraps of red cloth or lengths of thread worn thin by repeated tying and untying. In one corner, an old silver spoon rests, always used to stir herbal teas for the sick, never for any other purpose. On the door hangs a wreath of dried rosemary and garlic, believed to guard against both sickness and evil spirits. Among the most common charms is the pain chain. It's a simple string knotted once for every tooth lost, worn around the neck or hidden under a pillow at night. As each knot is tied, a wish is made. For strength, for relief, for the courage to face whatever comes. Children take pride in their chains, comparing the number of knots as if they were medals earned in battle. Sometimes, the pain chain is buried at the base of an old tree, its wishes sent out to mingle with the roots and rise again in the spring. There are also charms against the tooth witch, a spirit blamed for stubborn pain, for fevers that will not break, for dreams filled with biting and shadows. To keep her away, parents hang small bundles of nettle and rowan above the bed, draw symbols with ashes on the doorframe, or leave a bowl of fresh milk on the windowsill. On the rare night when a tooth falls out without pain, there is quiet celebration, a sign that the witch has been fooled, at least for now. Folk healers, when called, bring their own magic. Some mix elaborate salves from a dozen wild herbs, each with its secret purpose. Others trust more in the drama of their presence, entering the home with a swirl of cloaks, a clatter of beads, a voice loud enough to scare the pain itself. Their advice is often a blend of old wisdom and performance. Turn 3 times widdershins before spitting out your pain, one will say. Sleep with a sprig of lavender in your mouth, and the ache will drift into your dreams and out of your body. Whether or not these acts work, the power of the healer's confidence is undeniable. Their belief gives the sufferer permission to believe, too. Among the most ancient practices is the mirror ritual. When the pain is at its worst, a person is brought before a bowl of water and told to stare at their own reflection by candlelight. The healer whispers, "See the pain, name the pain, let the pain pass through." Sometimes the candle is snuffed out at the height of the ritual, symbolizing the end of the ache. Sometimes a bit of wax is dropped into the water, floating and spinning, carrying the pain away with it. The ritual is as much about facing the suffering as it is about ending it, teaching the young that pain must be acknowledged before it can be released. Stories grow around these rituals like wildflowers in the fields. There is the tale of the boy who buried his pain chain beneath an old oak and woke the next morning free of suffering. There is the legend of the healer who whispered to a swarm of bees, asking them to carry away the pain, and found the village's toothaches gone for a whole summer. There are warnings, too. The girl who forgot to offer thanks to the tooth spirit and woke with all her teeth loose in her mouth. The old man who mocked the power of sage and found his jaw locked tight until he apologized to the herbs. Yet, for all the power of these rituals, not every ache can be chased away by magic. Sometimes, the pain is a herald of deeper trouble, a sickness that no spell can soothe. In these moments, the rituals become acts of kindness, gestures that soften the edge of suffering if only by making it shared. The community gathers, the family holds vigil, the pain is witnessed and honored, even if it cannot be banished. There is wisdom in this, too, the understanding that sometimes the best magic is simply not to suffer alone. What of those who doubted? Every village had its skeptics, the men and women who trusted more in steel and strong drink than in spells. But even they might find themselves tying a bit of red thread or spitting into the wind on a night when the pain grew too sharp to bear. In the end, suffering is the great equalizer. Everyone, sooner or later, will grasp at hope, however thin. The world of magic and ritual was, and is, a world of resourcefulness. In the absence of certainty, people learned to create their own answers, to weave meaning from the random cruelty of pain. And in that weaving, they found a measure of peace, a sense that the world was not just a place of suffering, but of connection, beauty, and the unbroken chain of care that binds each generation to the next. So the next time you hear an old charm, see a child tie a red string or smell the smoke of sage drifting in the evening air, remember that you are witnessing the echoes of this long, quiet battle. A fight not just against pain, but against despair. Every word, every gesture, every herb and charm is a defiance, a promise that as long as people hope, no night is truly dark. If you could travel back, slipping through the layers of centuries to sit quietly in the corner of a medieval home on a night of pain, you might be struck by something deeper than the rituals themselves. The sense of community, the unspoken agreement that no one should bear their suffering alone. In a world where pain was a constant visitor, hope was a rare and fragile treasure, and it took many hands, many hearts to keep it alive. Let's begin with the hearth. This is the heart of the home, not just for warmth and food, but for healing, for gathering, for the telling of stories and the weaving of spells. The fire's light dances across the faces of the family, highlighting the lines of worry on a mother's brow. The clenched fists of a child clutching a rag against her cheek. A father feeds the flames, carefully selecting wood that is said to bring luck, birch for strength, apple for gentleness, ash for protection. Even the act of tending the fire becomes a kind of prayer. Let this house be safe, let this pain be brief. In these moments, everyone has a part to play. The oldest grandmother, her back bent by years, is the keeper of knowledge. She remembers which herbs to use for which kind of ache, which words to whisper, which charms must be hidden from jealous spirits. She is the one who dips a cloth in warm salt water, wrings it out, and presses it to the swollen jaw, her voice low and steady as she murmurs a lullaby that is half song, half spell. Her touch is as important as any medicine, the reassurance that suffering can be shared, that it is never just yours. The younger children, sometimes fearful, sometimes simply curious, are sent to fetch what is needed. A jar of honey from the pantry, a bundle of mint, a clean cup for tea. Even the smallest task is part of the ritual. A way to show that everyone's energy, everyone's hope, can help push back the pain. The siblings watch closely, learning the steps for the day when it will be their turn, when they too must stand against the old enemy with nothing but words, herbs, and willpower. Sometimes neighbors are invited in, not out of obligation, but because pain has always been easier to face together. Someone brings bread, someone else brings dried flowers, or a piece of old bone said to carry a blessing. There are quiet jokes to break the tension, stories of other toothaches endured, other nights survived. A boy who once screamed through a whole night is now the proud owner of a pain chain with 6 knots, each one a memory of victory. A widow recalls how her late husband used to bite on willow twigs and sing to the moon, claiming that the song would drive the ache into the stars. Each story is a tiny lantern, lighting the way through the darkness of the present moment. And then there is the healer, the wise woman, the herbwife, the quiet uncle known for his strong hands and gentle heart. When she arrives, the room shifts. She carries a satchel of dried roots and flowers, a bundle of nettles, a wooden spoon darkened by years of use. She does not rush. Instead, she takes time to listen, to look into the patient's eyes, to touch the cheek and feel the heat. Her presence is part of the cure, her certainty a gift that everyone borrows for themselves. She offers not just remedies, but questions. What did you eat today? Did you have strange dreams? Did anyone visit you while you slept? She is looking for patterns, signs, the hidden cause behind the pain. Her understanding of illness is both practical and mystical, part doctor, part priest, part friend. The ritual begins in earnest. The healer makes tea from willow bark and mint, a brew so bitter that even the bravest children grimace. She instructs the family to hold hands around the patient, to breathe together, to focus on the warmth of the fire and the sound of their voices. Someone recites a blessing, another repeats a rhyme. When the tea is drunk, the healer anoints the jaw with a paste of honey and sage, tracing a protective symbol on the skin. The room grows quiet, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft hum of the healer's song. For a moment, sometimes only a heartbeat, sometimes an hour, hope fills the space where pain used to be. It is a fragile thing, this hope, but in the world before true medicine, it is sometimes the only cure. The patient closes her eyes, the pain softens, and the family sits together, holding the night at bay with their faith, their love, their stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. There are countless variations on these rituals. Some families keep a pain doll, a small figure stuffed with herbs, which is squeezed or twisted in the hope of drawing the pain away from the body and into the doll. When the suffering passes, the doll is buried in the garden or floated down the river, carrying the pain far from home. Other homes hang bunches of dried nettle, rowan, or rue above the bed, believing these plants to be especially hated by tooth spirits. Children are taught never to point at a tooth with a knife, never to curse their own pain out loud, lest they draw the attention of something worse. Among the most universal practices is the nightly prayer to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. Her name is whispered at the window, invoked over bowls of milk and slices of bread left as offerings. It is said that she knows the ache, that she walks beside every sufferer in the night, that her blessing can turn agony to sleep. Even those who rarely pray may find themselves calling her name when the pain is at its worst, bargaining with saints and spirits alike for just a little relief. Some rituals are more playful, reflecting a child's way of coping. A tooth that falls out is not just a sign of growing up. It is a magical event, a chance to bargain with invisible powers. The tooth might be thrown onto the roof, or dropped into a well, or given to a pet cat with the promise that the new tooth will be strong as a tiger. the fear and wonder of pain become an adventure, something to be talked about at the next market day, a badge of courage to show to friends. But there are failures, too. Not every spell works, not every herb brings comfort. When hope fades, the rituals take on a new meaning, not as cures, but as reminders that no one suffers alone. The healer returns, perhaps with a new idea, perhaps only with a kind word and a strong arm to hold the patient through the worst of it. The family gathers again, this time to mourn, to comfort, to remember that even in loss there is connection, there is meaning, there is the promise of another day. Through all of this, the rituals against tooth pain reveal something essential about human nature. Faced with suffering, people create meaning, create beauty, create connection. Every charm and chant, every cup of bitter tea and night spent awake by the fire, is a declaration that hope will not be extinguished. Even when the world seems ruled by darkness and agony, there is always the chance, however small, however fleeting, that a new day will bring relief. As dawn breaks over the village, the healer gathers her things, the family settles into sleep, and the pain, if not banished, has at least been witnessed, shared, honored. The rituals of the night do not always bring healing, but they always bring belonging, always remind the sufferers that their battle is not theirs alone. If you listen closely, as the sun climbs the sky and the world stirs to life, you might hear laughter, the telling of last night's stories, the slow return of hope. Someone's pain has eased, if only a little. Someone else is already preparing for another night, another ritual, another chance to turn suffering into strength. So when you next feel safe, when your smile comes easily, think of the hundreds of hands, the thousands of nights, the uncountable acts of courage and kindness that came before you. These rituals, strange and beautiful, simple and profound, are the true legacy of every village, every family, every heart that ever refused to give up. Because in the end, the greatest magic is not in the herbs or the spells, but in the act of facing pain together, of transforming suffering into story, of making even the longest night bearable with hope, with love, and with the knowledge that you are never alone. Night does not always bring rest. For many who survived the chair, the worst trials began after the screams faded and the door of the barber's shop had. The story of medieval dental cures does not end with the slamming of the barber's door or the fading of screams into the darkness. If anything, that is where the hardest part truly begins. In a world without anesthesia, antibiotics, or the gentle hands of modern medicine, the aftermath of treatment was its own battlefield, a place where relief and ruin walked side by side, and where survival depended on luck, the strength of the body, and the care of those willing to sit beside the wounded through the night. Imagine the village at dusk, the ritual of tooth pulling just completed. The patient, an old farmer perhaps, or a child whose courage finally snapped, slumps in the barber's chair, face streaked with tears and sweat. The air is thick with the smell of blood, the metallic tang mingling with the stale sweetness of cheap wine poured in hopes of dulling the pain. The neighbors who helped to hold the writhing body step back, their hands shaking, voices hoarse from shouting encouragement or prayers. For a moment there is quiet. Then the barber wipes his tools, nods to the family, and the ordeal is over. Or so everyone hopes. But for those who survived the treatment, the next hours and days would become a second, quieter trial, one that many would not escape. The first enemy was blood. Mouths bleed easily and often, and a poorly pulled tooth could leave behind a wound that refused to close. Blood pooled on the tongue, seeped from swollen gums, dripped in thick ropes onto the rough linen of the patient's shirt. There were herbs and spells meant to stop it. Yarrow packed into the wound, cold water held in the mouth, whispered pleas to saints and spirits. Sometimes these tricks worked. More often, they only slowed the bleeding, leaving the patient dizzy, weak, and pale. Some tried to hide their suffering, unwilling to show fear or to admit defeat after the public spectacle of the extraction. But the color draining from their faces, the trembling hands, the way they could barely speak or swallow, these were signs that every neighbor recognized. For the very old and the very young, blood loss alone could be deadly. It was not uncommon for a family to gather in silent dread, watching as the life slowly slipped away from a loved one, unable to do anything but whisper prayers and wipe a fevered brow. Even for those whose bleeding stopped, danger was far from over. The mouth, always moist and exposed to dirt and germs, was a perfect breeding ground for infection. In a time before anyone understood what bacteria were, there was only the evidence of the senses. The foul smell that crept from the wound, the heat that radiated from a swollen cheek, the yellow pus that leaked from the site where a tooth had once lived. A successful extraction one day could turn to agony the next, a sharp, stabbing pain that spread through the jaw, up to the temple, down the neck. The fever followed, slow at first, then relentless. Chills, sweating, confusion. Sometimes the patient would grow quiet, then delirious, speaking nonsense or calling for dead relatives who waited on the other side of the dark. Families did what they could. Herbal washes, sage, salt water, strong wine were swished and spat again and again in desperate hope of washing the infection away. Poultices were packed against the cheek, mixtures of garlic, onion, vinegar, or honey. The room was kept warm, the fire stoked through the night. Sometimes the healer or priest was called to bless the wound or offer last rites. There were stories, told in hushed voices, of miraculous recoveries, of fevers broken at dawn, of wounds that closed clean and left only a hard scar as memory. But for every story of survival, there were others left untold, stories of children buried before their time, of mothers lost in the prime of life, of old men who simply faded away. Complications were not limited to infection or bleeding. Sometimes, the force needed to wrench a stubborn tooth from the jaw cracked the bone itself. The patient might find themselves unable to chew or speak, their face twisted in pain, the wound refusing to heal. Bone fragments left behind would fester for weeks or months, working their way out in pus and blood, or remaining as a constant source of agony. There was no recourse, no second chance. For these unlucky souls, life became a long, grinding torment, each day measured by the dull ache in the jaw. the constant fear of eating, the whispered prayers that something, anything, would finally bring relief. The most dreaded complication was the spreading of infection beyond the mouth. Sometimes a wound would swell, turning red and hard, and soon the neck would thicken, the skin hot to the touch. Breathing became hard, swallowing impossible. The family watched in horror as the infection crept downward, closing off the throat. This was called lockjaw, though we now know it as tetanus or a deep abscess. There were no cures, only the hope that the swelling would subside before it suffocated the patient. Many did not live to see another sunrise. In the worst cases, the infection moved deeper, into the blood, spreading through the body in a deadly silence. The patient would weaken day by day, feverish and shivering, then cold and pale, slipping quietly from life with barely a sound. For the villagers, this was a curse, a punishment, or perhaps a test. Some saw it as the will of God or the spirits, a sign that the pain was meant to be endured, not cut away. Others cursed the barber, the healer, even the patient themselves, searching for a reason, an answer, some way to make sense of the randomness of survival and death. Those who survived such ordeals were forever changed. Some carried scars, deep, twisted lines along the jaw, missing teeth, hollowed cheeks. Others bore invisible wounds. A fear of darkness, a terror of pain, nightmares of fire and iron, of hands gripping their head while their world dissolved into agony. For many, the trauma lingered, shaping the rest of their lives. Some refused ever again to seek help for any pain, preferring to suffer in silence. Others became advocates for the old ways, insisting on rituals and remedies over steel and tongs. A few became healers themselves, driven by the memory of what they or their loved ones had endured. The barber, too, was not untouched. Every death, every failure was a mark on his soul. His tools might be wiped clean, but the memory of screams, of faces twisted in fear, of families left weeping, was not so easily scrubbed away. Some barbers grew hard, convinced that pain was simply a fact of life. Others became gentler, always seeking new ways to ease suffering, to learn from mistakes, to avoid the worst of the old horrors. A few left the trade altogether, unable to bear the weight of so much pain and loss. The village as a whole learned to adapt. Those who had seen too many friends die after treatment became wary of the barber's chair, turning more often to herbs, spells, or simple endurance. Community knowledge grew, what plants to use for bleeding, which prayers seemed to help, when to call the healer, when to call the priest. The stories of those lost were told as warnings, reminders that no pain is simple, no cure without cost. Children listened and remembered, their own fears shaped by the tales of blood and fever, of mothers and fathers who went into the barber's shop and never came out again. They learned early to fear infection, to recognize the signs of danger. A red streak running up the jaw, a fever that would not break, a wound that smelled wrong. These were the harbingers of disaster, and everyone learned to watch for them. And yet hope endured. For every tragedy, there were survivors who lived long if battered lives, who raised families, told their stories, and passed down hard-won wisdom to the next generation. The rituals of healing, of prayer and herb, of touch and song, grew richer, more intricate, each act a tribute to those who had suffered and survived. So the next time you touch your own jaw or smile in the mirror, remember the price that was paid for relief in those dark days. The blood, the infection, the scars both visible and hidden, these are part of the story, too. The survivors are not just the ones who lived, but the ones who remembered, who found meaning in pain, and who carried that meaning forward, one aching day at a time. Night falls over the village, and in the hush that follows, another story begins. The long, uncertain hours after treatment, when the future hangs by a thread. This is a different kind of darkness. Gone are the screams and the spectacle of the barber's chair, replaced by the smaller, quieter terrors that creep into every home where someone has survived the ordeal, but not yet escaped its shadow. For many, this was the true test, the endless wait to see who would recover and who would slip quietly into the arms of death. The first hours after an extraction were often the worst. The patient would be helped home, the taste of blood thick in their mouth, their face swollen and mottled with bruises. The family gathered close, eyes full of worry, hands ready to fetch water, to wring cloths, to pray. The bravest tried to joke, insisting the worst was over, but everyone in the room knew better. The true danger had just begun. Blood loss, even when not immediately fatal, left the body weak and cold. Children especially were vulnerable, their small bodies unable to cope with the volume lost to the barber's rough hands and rusted tools. Even adults who thought themselves strong would sometimes collapse hours later, overcome by dizziness and weakness. Those first nights were filled with whispered questions. Is he too pale? Is the bleeding stopped? Is that fever or just a chill from the night air? Every answer was provisional, every hope fragile. It was in these moments that the line between healing and harm was thinnest. The wound might clot, the bleeding might slow, but now infection waited, invisible and relentless. The village knew the signs by heart, the wound turning hot and angry, the jaw swelling until the skin stretched tight and shiny, the taste of rot blooming beneath the tongue. Sometimes the patient could no longer open their mouth at all. Swallowing became agony. Sleep was broken by nightmares, fever dreams in which they bit down on fire, or wandered endless fields searching for a tooth that was always just out of reach. There were remedies, and every family tried them. Saltwater rinses until the gums burned. Poultices of onion and garlic, their strong scent filling the house. A cloth soaked in vinegar and pressed to the cheek, sometimes replaced every hour through the night. Some prayed to saints, others chanted old rhymes, hoping to frighten the fever away. If the patient was lucky, the swelling broke and pus, foul and yellow, drained from the wound. Sometimes this brought relief, other times it was just the beginning of a new wave of misery. The worst cases led to what villagers called the bad sleep. The patient would drift in and out of consciousness, sweating and mumbling, their skin alternately burning and icy. Friends and neighbors visited quietly, paying respects in case the end came before dawn. Some brought food or medicine, others just sat by the fire, offering presents in a world where there was little else to give. The priest might be called, his prayers rising above the crackle of the hearth. Children watched from corners, learning early the high price of survival. For those who made it through the first days, the weeks that followed were a slow climb back to something like health. Eating was a torment. Chewing brought new waves of pain, bread and broth replaced harder foods. Speech was slurred, laughter rare. The face healed slowly, if at all, and often not evenly, a jaw forever crooked, a cheek sunken by the loss of bone or flesh. Some lost all desire for company, hiding their wounds and their shame. Others became storytellers, their survival proof of either stubbornness or luck, depending on who was listening. But survival did not mean a return to normal life. For many, the damage was permanent. A jaw that healed wrong might never open fully again. Scarring inside the mouth could make every meal an ordeal. Some developed a fistula, a passage that led from the mouth to the outside of the cheek, leaking pus and saliva, a wound that never closed. These were the people who lived on the edge of the village's pity, their stories whispered to children as warnings. Do not anger the spirits. Do not trust too quickly in steel. And always there was the threat of death's return. Months after a successful extraction, an old infection might flare, a piece of bone work its way to the surface, a fever catch hold and refuse to let go. For the old and the frail, this was often the last battle, a slow, painful decline that everyone recognized but no one could halt. Families, too, paid a price. The constant need for care wore down the strongest. Mothers who lost sleep to tend the sick fell ill themselves. Fathers who spent nights at the bedside missed days in the fields. Brothers and sisters learned to fear the red streaks running up a wrist, the hot, shining skin, the faint, sick-sweet smell that meant the worst was near. Loss was communal, each death a wound in the fabric of the village, each survival a hard-won joy tempered by the memory of those who had not returned. And then there was the silence. After a funeral, after the last rites, there lingered a quiet, heavy as stone. The tools of suffering were cleaned and put away, the stories told and retold, sometimes as comfort, sometimes as warning. Those who had survived walked a little slower, carried themselves with the humility that comes from knowing how thin the line is between life and death. Children played barber in the lanes, but their games always ended with someone lying very still, eyes closed, pretending not to breathe. For the barber, each loss was a shadow that followed him through the streets. He might claim the failures were not his fault, that the wound was too deep, the spirit too weak, the body already sick. But in quiet moments, he remembered every face. Some barbers hardened their hearts, blaming fate. Others became obsessed with finding safer ways, cleaner tools, gentler hands, new remedies. A few gave up entirely, their own spirits broken by the cost of pain. Yet life continued. The pain never stopped coming. The next patient always appeared at the door. The village learned to adapt, to value prevention when possible, to cherish the rare stories of recovery. Herbal lore grew richer, rituals more elaborate, every new scar adding to the collective memory of what it meant to survive. Not every ending was tragic. Some patients healed cleanly, the wound closing with little fuss, the fever passing in a day. These rare recoveries were celebrated, retold at every feast, the survivor held up as an example of good luck, strong blood, or a particularly effective charm. Their smiles, gapped but genuine, became a symbol of hope, proof that pain could be conquered, if not easily or often. But even these victories were tinged with caution. Everyone knew someone whose luck had failed, whose recovery had turned to ruin overnight. The balance between hope and fear was never more delicate than in those first weeks after healing. When every cough, every wince, every bad dream might mean the beginning of the end. As the years went by, the village carried its stories forward. Children grew up hearing about the uncle who bled for days but survived, the neighbor whose jaw swelled until she could not speak, the grandmother who claimed her prayers brought down a fever that no medicine could touch. Each tale was a thread in the tapestry of survival, rough, knotted, sometimes bright, sometimes dark, but always woven with the memory of what was risked and what was lost. So, as you listen now, safe in your own time, remember that every easy smile is a triumph paid for in blood and fear, that every simple meal was once a battle against agony and fate. The world of medieval medicine was a world of risk, of hard choices, of endurance and loss. For those who survived, life was never the same, but it was life, and that was worth everything. There are moments in every village, after the blood has dried and the worst fever has broken, when life seems to stumble forward as if nothing happened. Children run through the muddy lanes, chasing chickens, shouting and laughing. Men return to the fields, bent over their work, while women gather at the well to share gossip and scraps of advice. Yet, beneath all this ordinary bustle, the scars of treatment linger, visible and invisible, shaping the rhythms and fears of the community for weeks, months, even generations. In those days and nights after a tooth is pulled, the world shrinks. Everything revolves around the sick room, a rough bed near the hearth, a basin half filled with water tinged pink from rinsing, a jumble of herbal bundles hanging low above the patient's head. At first, the focus is on crisis, stopping the blood, cooling the fever, praying for a sign that the danger has passed. But as time wears on, the struggle changes. Now it is about endurance, about the slow, uncertain process of healing, and about the ghost of pain that refuses to leave, haunting every bite of bread, every word spoken, every dream. The survivors of medieval dental procedures often emerged as different people, older, slower, marked by what they had endured. Some limped through the rest of their lives with a jaw that clicked or refused to close fully, a mouth twisted in a permanent half-grimace. Others lost their appetite for food and for life, haunted by the memory of pain so fierce it seemed to split the world in two. For some, the loss was visible: missing teeth, sunken cheeks, an eye that watered constantly because the roots of the jaw were never quite the same again. For others, the loss was a quiet thing, a fear of doctors and sharp metal, a refusal to let anyone near their mouth ever again. Families learned quickly how to care for these wounded. Meals became an exercise in patience and creativity. Soft bread soaked in broth, boiled roots mashed into a paste, a careful balance of nourishment, and the need to avoid pain. There were little rituals to coax a survivor to eat, songs sung low, promises of honey or a favorite stew, gentle hands guiding a spoon to lips that barely opened. Every meal was a triumph, a measure of progress, but also a reminder of all that had been lost. The risks never fully disappeared. Even after apparent healing, a mouth could suddenly swell with new pain, a hidden infection bursting to the surface weeks or months later. Sometimes, a piece of dead bone worked its way out of the gum, leaving a raw wound and a fresh cycle of fever. At other times, the whole side of a face might grow numb, the nerves damaged by a rough hand or a slip of the iron tongs. There were those who developed what was called the droop, a face forever pulled to one side, speech slurred, sometimes accompanied by headaches so violent they sent the sufferer into darkness for days at a time. For the unlucky, this new suffering led not just to discomfort, but to slow decline. A persistent mouth infection could spread to the ear or the throat, turning every swallow into agony, every word into a groan. Sleep was interrupted by the throbbing pulse of pain. Friends grew distant, unable to bear the sight and sound of someone living in constant torment. In time, the body wasted, the will faded, and the patient slipped away, not with the drama of the barber's chair, but with the quiet, unstoppable drift of one who has simply had enough. The rest of the village watched these declines with fear and helplessness. It was a lesson in humility, in the limits of their knowledge and power. No matter how many herbs were brewed, how many prayers whispered, there were some wounds that would not heal, some pains that would not let go. Elders warned the young against foolishness, against seeking out the barber for anything less than life and death need. Children learned to hide their aches for as long as possible, not just out of pride, but out of terror that help might leave them worse off than before. And yet there were moments of defiance. The survivors, if they lived, became sources of wisdom. They learned the best ways to rinse a wound, the most comforting teas, the gentlest foods. Their advice was sought after and respected. Sometimes they developed a kind of dark humor, joking about trading faces with the devil or collecting teeth for luck. In the long winter nights, these stories became legends, teaching the next generation both caution and courage. For the barbers, every healed patient was a rare victory, a story to be celebrated and remembered. But every loss, every failure weighed heavier. Some barbers tried to learn from each mistake, experimenting with new herbs, boiling their tools, borrowing tricks from healers and wise women. Others became bitter, blaming the weakness of their patients or the interference of spirits. A few, haunted by the eyes of those who never made it home, quietly left the trade and vanished from the village, taking their secrets and their guilt with them. The threat of infection and death also changed the social fabric. It became customary to visit the sick room, not just to bring food or comfort, but to bear witness. Villagers came and sat by the patient's side, sharing their own stories of pain, offering a hand to hold or a prayer to share. These visits were sometimes the only thing that kept despair at bay. To see others survive, to hear laughter, even forced, even thin, was a reminder that suffering could be endured, that life went on. After funerals, families gathered for weeks, lighting candles, reciting the names of those lost to the cure. Children grew up hearing their names, learning that even the most routine pain could become a turning point between life and death. Each new case of toothache was greeted with both hope and dread, and every decision to see the barber was weighed as carefully as any battle plan. It's easy, from the distance of centuries, to judge these practices as cruel or hopeless. But inside that world, they were acts of love, of courage, of desperation. The people who survived did so not because they were stronger, but because they had help, a neighbor to check their wound, a mother to brew another cup of sage tea, a friend to sit up through the long, feverish night. Every scar told a story, every empty place at the table a warning and a memory. In rare moments, something truly miraculous happened. A wound healed clean, a fever broke, the pain disappeared and never returned. The survivor was welcomed back into the world, celebrated as if reborn. These stories gave hope, fueled belief in better days, and reminded everyone that the darkness was never absolute. Even in a world ruled by pain, light could break through, if only for a moment. So next time you hear the word recovery, think of these survivors. The men and women who faced death not just once, but over and over in every meal, every laugh, every day spent learning to live with what could not be undone. Their strength was not in denying pain, but in enduring it together, building a life around it, refusing to let it silence the small joys of ordinary days. The village endures. The memory of pain endures. And in every scar, every gentle touch, every shared story, you can find the stubborn hope that kept humanity alive, even when every cure came with a risk, and every relief was won at the highest cost. Imagine, for a moment, the long centuries where pain was an expected part of living. In every village, in every crowded city street, the threat of toothache hung like a shadow over daily life. The memories of agony, blood, and risk were woven into stories, prayers, and even the language itself. To face the barber meant to face your worst fear. To survive the cure was a badge of honor. For generations, hope was a rare guest, and most saw no other way. But time, as it always does, began to turn. Change crept in, not with a shout, but with a whisper, a promise that things could, one day, be different. It started, as most revolutions do, with a question. What if pain was not a punishment? What if the screaming and the trembling, the fevers and the deaths were not the price of relief, but a failure of knowledge? In great cities, where scholars gathered and books were copied by careful hands, some began to wonder, could suffering be avoided? Could there be another way? The earliest hope came not from magic or prayer, but from experiment. Healers and alchemists tested herbs and minerals, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes in desperation. There were records, careful, patient lists of what eased pain, even for a little while. Willow bark, already famous in folk medicine, was pressed and brewed, its bitter taste a promise that science might yet rival the old spells. Clove oil was dropped into rotten teeth, numbing flesh with surprising effectiveness. Opium poppies were boiled into dark, sticky syrups. Their gentle sleep, a rare mercy for those who could find and afford them. But the true revolution came with the slow dawn of understanding, when healers began to see that pain was not just fate, but a symptom, a problem to be solved. In universities and apothecary shops, men in heavy robes argued over the nature of nerves, of infection, of the invisible world hiding in every wound. The microscope, new and magical, revealed a world of tiny monsters, wriggling and multiplying, responsible for much of the suffering once blamed on spirits or bad air. The more people learned, the more they realized. Pain could be fought, not with courage alone, but with knowledge and care. The first real breakthroughs were humble things. Barbers and surgeons began to boil their tools, to wash their hands, to throw away rags soaked in pus and blood. The old superstitions, though comforting, slowly gave ground to rules about cleanliness. Wounds treated with clean water and covered with fresh linen healed better, less often turning to rot and fever. At first, these changes spread slowly, adopted by a few careful practitioners and whispered about in the markets. But as the stories grew, stories of patients who survived, who recovered without the long decline, hope began to feel less like wishful thinking and more like a plan. Then in the great cities, a miracle arrived. In the early years of the new era, travelers and scholars brought word of a strange new discovery, an elixir, a powder, a gas that could banish pain itself, if only for a short time. The earliest anesthetics were crude but wondrous. Ether, with its sharp, sweet smell and nitrous oxide, laughing gas, that sent patients into fits of giggles or deep, blessed sleep. For the first time in living memory, a tooth could be pulled in silence, without screams, without the iron grip of friends holding the patient down. Imagine the scene. The barber, now calling himself a dentist, prepares his tools in a room filled with sunlight, not shadows. The patient, trembling but hopeful, sits in the chair. A cloth soaked in ether is placed over the nose and mouth. The world spins, fades, and when the patient wakes, the pain is gone, not just ended, but forgotten. Word spreads like fire through the city streets, and soon even the most hardened old men, those who had sworn never again to face the chair, line up for their turn at the miracle. The changes did not stop there. Instruments, once battered and rusted, were redesigned with new metals, new shapes, new precision. Forceps with curved handles, drills that spun faster and cleaner, syringes that delivered measured drops of medicine directly into the gum. Each innovation chipped away at the old fear. Each improvement making the prospect of treatment a little less terrifying. But perhaps the greatest change was not in the tools or even the drugs, but in the attitude of those who wielded them. As understanding grew, so did compassion. The new dentists began to see themselves not as executioners or torturers, but as healers, protectors, guides through the valley of suffering. They learned to speak softly, to explain what would happen, to offer comfort before and after the procedure. For the first time, the cabinet of the dentist became a place of hope, not just dread. It was not an easy road. Many resisted. In the countryside, the old barbers clung to their ways, warning of the dangers of newfangled poisons and city tricks. Some patients, scarred by a lifetime of pain, refused to trust the promise of relief. But little by little, the evidence mounted. Children returned from the dentist smiling, not screaming. Mothers who once prayed through the night now slept beside their recovering children, marveling at the quiet, at the absence of fever, at the way wounds healed clean. Hygiene became the new magic. Soap, once a luxury, was pressed into every doctor's and dentist's hand. Water was boiled, bandages changed daily, instruments kept bright and gleaming. Infection rates plummeted. People who would once have died after a simple extraction now walked home the same day, hungry and relieved. The memory of the old pain faded, replaced by stories of relief, of laughter in the waiting room, of neighbors comparing the smell of ether to fresh apples or spring rain. Education, too, spread hope. Dentists learned not only from experience, but from books, from lectures, from correspondence with colleagues in distant countries. What had once been guesswork became a science. Charts were made of nerves and blood vessels, diagrams drawn of the best ways to pull a tooth or clean a wound. Mistakes, when they happened, were studied and learned from, not hidden or dismissed as fate. For ordinary people, these changes arrived in small, often miraculous ways. A father who had watched his own father die from a simple toothache now saw his son skip home after treatment, eager for supper. A mother who had lost her smile to years of pain found it again, her mouth whole, her fear eased by the gentle hands and careful words of the new dentist. The stories told at the well or by the fire began to change. Less about blood and screams, more about relief, gratitude, even joy. Yet old memories lingered. The elders remembered the bad times, the days when every meal was a gamble, every ache a sentence. They told these stories not just as warnings, but as reminders to be grateful, to cherish the new era, to never forget what it had cost to arrive here. The rituals of magic and prayer did not vanish overnight. Many still left offerings to tooth spirits, war charms, or whispered blessings over a sick child. But now these acts were joined by trips to the dentist, by bottles of clove oil and packets of painkiller, by the new rituals of hygiene and hope. The final victory of humane dentistry was not just the end of pain, but the restoration of dignity. Patients no longer feared being shamed or broken in the chair. They became partners in their own healing, learning how to care for their mouths, how to prevent decay, how to demand better treatment. Children grew up unafraid, their first toothache an inconvenience, not a curse. Communities learned to support each other, not just in grief, but in relief and celebration. So next time you sit in the dentist's chair, breathe deep and feel the calm that centuries of struggle have won for you. Remember that your comfort, your confidence, your expectation of gentle care are the gifts of all who suffered, hoped, and dreamed before you. The story of pain did not end. It changed, becoming a story of hope, of progress, of what happens when humanity refuses to accept suffering as fate. The new era was not perfect. There were still mistakes, still pain, still lives lost to ignorance or neglect. But now, For the first time, the arc of history bent toward kindness. The future, once full of screams and shadows, was suddenly bright with the possibility of a pain-free smile. Picture, if you will, the first dawns of this new era, not with trumpets and parades, but in small rooms where hope grew like a candle against the dark. For generations, pain had been a birthright, a teacher, a tyrant. It taught people humility and sometimes despair. But as the promise of relief spread, so did a new kind of courage. The courage not just to endure, but to seek out change, to trust in progress, to believe that the world could become gentler one small miracle at a time. It was not an overnight transformation. Change rarely is. For many, especially in distant villages and among the elderly, fear and memory fought against hope. The stories of agony were too fresh. Some elders would clutch their old amulets, mutter a blessing, and shake their heads at news of gas and new medicine. They remembered the taste of blood, the cold iron, the silent dread before the barber's knock. For them, the very idea of falling asleep while someone worked inside your mouth was more terrifying than the pain itself. But the younger generations were different. They had heard the old stories, but now they saw new ones unfolding. Children who once grew up watching their parents writhe in the barber's chair now lined up with curiosity rather than fear. The dentist's office became a place of reassurance. A nurse in a clean white apron might greet them at the door. The air would smell not of burning flesh, but of soap and mint. The chair was padded, the windows bright, the tools gleaming in their trays, not a secret arsenal, but a sign that everything had a purpose, a place, a reason. For the first time, parents could promise their children that the pain would be brief, manageable, perhaps not even felt at all. There were still tears, still nerves, still the jump of anxiety when a strange hand came close. But now the worst horror was gone, the expectation of torture, of survival by endurance alone. As ether and later chloroform, nitrous oxide, and local anesthetics became more widely available, relief came quickly, as miraculous as the first light after a storm. This change in attitude was as important as any technical breakthrough. Trust grew slowly, fed by every story of painless extractions, every neighbor who returned home with a smile instead of a shroud. Gradually, the community's memories shifted. Old rituals did not vanish, but became lighter, less desperate. The talisman on a string was no longer a last defense, but a keepsake, a memory of battles that need not be fought again. Dentists, too, found their work transformed. Where once they braced themselves for struggle, for the violence of restraint, the shouting, the risk of fainting or worse, they now learned the arts of reassurance. Gentle explanation replaced shouted orders. They learned to check for signs of infection before pulling a tooth, to ask about a patient's health, to offer aftercare. The idea of follow-up visits, unthinkable in the old days, became routine. The dentist was no longer a figure to fear, but a part of the family's circle of care. There was a flowering of new knowledge, each advance building on the last. Dental schools sprang up, where young men and women could study not just the use of tools, but the science of the mouth, the mysteries of enamel and nerves, the subtle art of making pain less likely in the first place. Anatomy lessons replaced superstition. Hygiene became the foundation of practice. Textbooks traveled across borders, filled with diagrams and notes, recipes for new anesthetics and antiseptics, techniques for stitching, cleaning, saving. Progress was not always fast, not always even, but it was steady. Mistakes were studied, not hidden. Pride shifted from toughness to skill, from brute force to gentle precision. For patients, this meant a world of difference. Imagine a woman who had lost her mother to infection years before. Now, when her own tooth began to ache, she would not wait in dread or seek out a wandering healer. She would visit the dentist with her daughter at her side, comforted by the certainty that whatever happened, she would not be alone, not face the ordeal in terror. Her treatment would be measured, careful, explained step by step. She would be offered pain relief, perhaps a mask, perhaps a carefully measured injection. If infection threatened, she would be given clean bandages, maybe even the new miracle of penicillin, should the timing be right. And after, she would rest not in dread, but in gratitude, surrounded by family who now saw the experience as routine, not ruinous. There were still setbacks, still places where old habits lingered. Some towns remained slow to trust outsiders or new ways. In poorer regions, access to the best medicines was limited. People still relied on herbs, prayers, folk magic when nothing else was available. But even here, stories of hope began to take root. It was no longer shameful to seek out relief, no longer a mark of weakness to ask for help. The bravest were now those who cared for themselves, who demanded humane treatment, who insisted that suffering was not the only measure of strength. With progress came celebration, not just relief. Families marked the passage from the old pain to the new hope with stories, sometimes even small parties after a child's first dental visit. Neighbors brought flowers, not just for funerals, but for the return of a smiling loved one. Songs changed. Lullabies promised rest and comfort, not warning and fear. The memory of agony became a lesson: respect your health, cherish your well-being, but no longer a prison. Dentists themselves became storytellers, sharing news of the latest advances. In the city, new machines appeared, foot-powered drills at first, then electric, each one faster, smoother, less terrifying than the last. Syringes for local anesthesia grew finer, their sting brief, their effect profound. Soon, patients would sit for long procedures with only a dull pressure, not pain, their minds free to wander. Their bodies spared the torment of their ancestors. Hygienists, nurses, and assistants joined the team, creating an environment where care was not rushed, but planned, considerate, thoughtful. The evolution of dental care reflected a deeper shift: the rise of dignity, the belief that every person deserved not just survival, but comfort. Laws were passed to protect patients, to regulate who could call themselves a dentist, to require clean spaces, safe tools, honest practice. Communities formed dental societies and charities, ensuring that even the poor, the forgotten, the fearful could share in this new promise. Yet the echoes of the past did not disappear completely. Grandparents told stories of the bad old days, not to frighten, but to honor the resilience that brought their families through. Museums kept displays of old tools, their cold iron a reminder of what was overcome. Some kept charms and old teeth as mementos, a tangible connection to those who had endured and survived, so that others could thrive. And as for the pain, it became not a curse, but a challenge, a signal to seek help, to ask for kindness, to expect more from medicine and from each other. Each new generation grew up with less fear, more agency, a broader horizon of what was possible. So let yourself wonder, what stories will be told of us centuries from now? Will people marvel at how we finally tamed the agony that ruled our ancestors' lives? Or will they see this era as just another step, another act of bravery on the long road toward greater humanity? In the quiet of the dentist's office, in the relief after a long illness, in the smile of a child unafraid, the answer lives and grows. The journey from torment to hope was not a straight line. It was a tapestry of little changes, big ideas, stubborn hearts, and ordinary hands. Every scar, every prayer, every act of innovation carried the world closer to a future where pain was not destiny, but a problem to be solved, and where even the sharpest ache could give way to comfort, dignity, and peace. Let's linger for a while on the threshold between eras, where memory and hope walk hand in hand. This is a world not quite free from pain, but finally learning that pain does not have to be king. The faces of those who endured, the grandmothers with stories etched in their eyes, the old men whose grins are wide and toothless, the children who once cowered from the sight of an iron tong, are slowly replaced by a new generation, one that knows relief as a right, not a gift from luck or fate. The change is not uniform. Across the vastness of lands and cultures, progress moves in fits and starts. In city streets, dentists are opening gleaming clinics, their walls bright with the promise of new science. Their patients arrive dressed in their Sunday best, nervous but eager, clutching handkerchiefs and questions. In the countryside, change is slower. A trickle of new knowledge carried by traveling doctors, pamphlets, rumors, and most powerfully, by returning sons and daughters who have seen another way. In these rural places, the old and the new live side by side. The herbwife and the dentist might nod to each other in the marketplace, each with their loyal followers. A mother, remembering her own mother's suffering, brings her child to both. First to the wise woman for a blessing, then to the dentist for real care. This blend of caution and hope, of ritual and science, becomes a bridge. No longer does one have to choose between tradition and progress. Each can have its place. Each can honor the lessons of survival. Communities begin to gather around these new practices. The opening of a dental clinic becomes an event, celebrated with music and food, neighbors crowding in to peek at the shining tools and spotless floors. Posters are nailed to trees and market stalls, promising painless treatment, modern relief, and most importantly, no more suffering. The local priest blesses the first chair, prayers are said, and then, hesitantly, proudly, the first patient sits, not in dread, but in hope. The emotional landscape changes too. Pain is no longer proof of virtue, nor is endurance the highest mark of strength. Compassion becomes fashionable. Families care for their sick not with silence and stoicism, but with attention, tenderness, and a willingness to seek help. The memory of agony becomes a warning, not a prophecy. Children are taught to speak up at the first sign of trouble, to trust their own voices, to expect kindness and answers. The phrase, "it will hurt less," becomes a promise, not an empty consolation. Dentists themselves are transformed. No longer are they just barber surgeons wielding crude forceps and iron will. Now they are respected professionals, members of societies, readers of journals, keepers of secrets that can turn pain to numbness and fear to relief. Some become educators, traveling from town to town with boxes of pamphlets, jars of ointment, and a passion for sharing what they have learned. Their stories are hopeful, sometimes even funny, tales of the first tooth pulled without a tear, the old farmer who danced after an extraction, the village that threw a feast for its new dentist. There are setbacks, of course. Not every promise is fulfilled. Early anesthetics can be dangerous, dosages are not always understood, and accidents happen. Poor hygiene, when forgotten, still invites infection. Greedy or poorly trained practitioners can bring new forms of suffering, but the direction is clear. Each mistake is met not with resignation, but with determination to improve. Public health campaigns emerge, sometimes led by nurses, sometimes by community leaders urging everyone to brush, to rinse, to look after one another's smiles. A healthy mouth, a healthy village, the posters proclaim, and slowly the words become reality. A new kind of storytelling emerges, one that honors the past but looks to the future. The old tales of blood and agony become stories of triumph. Remember how your grandfather lost 6 teeth and still kept smiling. Or caution, wait like I did, see the dentist early. There is gratitude, yes, but also pride in progress, in the way the community has learned and grown together. Grandmothers tell their grandchildren not just how to brew sage tea, but how to brush teeth in circles, how to gargle salt water, how to ask for help without shame. Children's games change too. The barber is replaced by the dentist, but now the play is gentle cotton balls for anesthesia, laughter instead of screaming, a high five after every successful procedure. The fear of pain becomes a story, not a fate. Birthdays are celebrated with bright, sticky candies, and parents no longer panic at the first ache. The rituals of the past, burying a tooth, leaving an offering for the spirits, remain but as playful gestures layered with memory, not desperation. With progress comes a sense of justice. Access to humane care becomes a right, not a privilege. Charities, governments, even private citizens work to bring clinics to poor villages, to train local healers, to share the knowledge that can save lives and ease suffering. The stories of children lost to infection or old women dying in agony become rallying cries. Never again. Each new clinic, each new smile, is a small victory in the ongoing battle against pain. Still, memory has its place. The old tooth charms, the worn pain chains, the bundles of sage and rowan still hang in corners and cupboards. They are not discarded, but cherished, reminders of what was survived, of ancestors who endured so that this gentler age could be born. In moments of uncertainty, in the hush before a new treatment or the first use of a new tool, people may still whisper an old blessing or rub a lucky coin. Progress does not erase the past. It honors it, transforms it, and gives it meaning. Imagine, then, an ordinary day in this new world. A child, tooth in hand, runs to show her mother the little gap in her smile. Together, they place the tooth under the pillow, perhaps for the tooth fairy, perhaps for the old spirits. In the morning, there is a coin, a hug, and if needed, a quick visit to the clinic, where a kind voice explains what to expect and a gentle hand makes sure nothing is wrong. The whole process is unremarkable, almost boring. The greatest miracle is that pain has become an exception, not a rule. And yet, the stories of the past remain a vital lesson. Elders gather in the evenings, sharing their memories with the young. Do not take this for granted, they say. Remember what it cost. Children listen, wide-eyed, to tales of midnight pain, of desperate prayers, of neighbors who did not return from the barber's chair. There are tears and laughter, pride and relief, and always the sense that suffering is not a badge of honor, but a challenge to be met with wisdom and care. In this new age, gratitude is woven into daily life. The clean, bright clinics, the careful, smiling dentists, the absence of screams in the night, all these are celebrated, even if quietly. People take pride in their smiles, not just for beauty, but for what they represent. The end of an old tyranny, the birth of a new kind of courage. The courage to seek help, to demand better, to believe that kindness is not weakness but strength. So as you brush your teeth tonight, as you book a checkup or comfort a child with an aching molar, pause for a moment. Remember the journey, the countless lives that made this comfort possible. Remember the old pain, honor the old stories, but let your heart rest in the new hope. You are living proof that pain does not have the last word. That progress, compassion, and the stubborn will to heal can transform even the longest history of suffering into a future bright with possibility. And maybe, just maybe, share your own story. Because every smile, every healed wound, every quiet night without fear is another thread in the long, unbroken tapestry of hope. Let's draw closer now, gather around the fire of memory, and look each other in the eyes for a moment, not as strangers divided by centuries, but as fellow travelers who have come a long, difficult road together. In every age, there are stories that matter not just because they are true, but because they help us understand who we are, where we come from, and what we might become. The story of pain, especially the pain that haunts the mouth, that robs smiles and sleep, that turns the simplest meal into a test of will, is one such story. It is the secret history behind every easy grin, every calm visit to the dentist, every night spent in quiet, unbroken rest. You might wonder, with all the miracles of modern life at your fingertips, why we would dwell so long on suffering, on wounds that have mostly healed, on fears that for many people are now no more than a shadow. Yet even today, as you sit in the bright, sterile chair of a dental office, heart racing as the whir of the drill begins, you feel it, the old fear, the echo of 1,000 years when pain was not just a possibility, but a certainty. Why does this fear persist, even now, when pain relief is only a needle or a pill away? Why do so many of us still tense up at the smell of antiseptic, the sight of silver instruments laid out in a neat row? The answer, perhaps, lies not just in the nerves of our teeth, but in the memory carried by our bodies, our families, our cultures. The echoes of the barber's chair, of iron tongs and burning nerves, of fevers and prayers and desperate hope, they have not vanished. They live in the stories passed down to us, in the way our grandparents speak about doctors, in the caution that comes before every appointment, in the sigh of relief that escapes when it is over, and we have survived yet again. The history of dental pain is not a relic. It is the foundation upon which every act of kindness, every moment of progress is built. The agony and endurance of the past forced people to look for better ways, to demand more from their healers, to believe in the possibility of a gentler future. It is no accident that the greatest leaps forward came from those who remembered most vividly the cost of inaction. The mothers who buried children, the barbers who lost sleep for years, the communities that learned to rally around their wounded. This is why memory matters. It is not just a museum of horrors, but a wellspring of strength and wisdom. The scars left by pain are not just marks of suffering. They are reminders of what people can survive, of how courage can outlast even the darkest night. The old rituals, the sage burned, the prayers whispered, the silver coin buried with a lost tooth, are not just superstition, but a way of saying, I was here, I endured, I did not give up. Every act of hope, every remedy tried in desperation, every hand held through a long fever was a thread in the fabric of survival. There is also a kind of humility in this memory. It reminds us that our comforts are hard-won, that what we take for granted was once the object of desperate prayers. Next time you smile without thinking, or eat a crisp apple with no fear, remember that this ease is a gift handed down by generations who knew only the sharp end of suffering. Their fear was not weakness, it was knowledge, a realistic understanding of risk and consequence. Their rituals and superstitions, their caution and their care, were the armor that kept families alive until something better could be found. But the story does not end with gratitude. The lesson of pain is not just to be thankful, but to be vigilant and compassionate. The old suffering reminds us to listen when someone else is afraid, to respect their fears, to offer comfort instead of scorn. Every nervous laugh in a waiting room, every trembling hand at the dentist's door, is a link in the chain of memory. When you reach out to comfort a child, or when you ask your own questions without shame, you are honoring the long struggle that made today's safety possible. And let's not pretend that pain is gone for good. For many in the world, the miracles of modern dentistry are still out of reach. Even where care is available, fear and distrust linger, sometimes rooted in real trauma, sometimes in stories handed down like old charms. By remembering how far we have come, we remind ourselves that there is more to do, more comfort to spread, more compassion to share. The future is not yet finished. It waits for us to bring what we have learned into new battles, new hopes, new stories. There is also power in remembering that strength takes many forms. It is not just found in stoic silence or in the ability to take the pain. True strength is also in asking for help, in trusting a gentle hand, in choosing to hope rather than endure. The old world demanded survival at any cost. The new world asks for dignity, for care, for kindness. When you step into a dentist's office and find that pain can be eased, you are not just lucky. You are living proof that history can change, that suffering can be turned into something better. As this story draws to a close, I invite you to pause just for a breath and ask yourself, what do you remember? What stories of pain and hope have you heard or lived or passed on? Has a grandparent ever described a nightmare from the old days? Have you ever felt that ancient anxiety before an appointment, the need to steel yourself as if for battle? Or maybe you've witnessed someone you care about face their fears and seen what real bravery looks like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep going, to seek comfort, to trust. If so, I invite you to share. Leave a comment below, add your voice to this long, unbroken chain. Tell us what you remember, what you learned, what you hope for the future. Your story is not small, not unimportant. It is the living heart of history, the proof that we are all connected by our struggles, our courage, and our hope. Because in the end, the story of pain is the story of resilience. Every person who endured, who sought comfort, who demanded better, helped build the world we live in now. We are their legacy, not just in our bright smiles, but in our compassion, our curiosity, our stubborn belief that tomorrow can be kinder than yesterday. So let us remember and let us honor. Not just with words, but with actions, with every gentle touch, every careful question, every effort to ease another's fear. The journey from torture to tenderness is not over. But with every memory, every act of empathy, every story shared, we keep moving forward together. Let's sit in the afterglow of this story, letting its echo linger, the way pain sometimes lingers in old scars, sharp in the memory, but softened by distance, woven into who we are. The fire is low, the night is deep, and across time we share something more important than facts or names. We share the strange, stubborn legacy of suffering and survival. A thread that connects a medieval village to a modern city. A boy gripping a wooden chair to a child sitting bravely in a dentist's office. A mother's whispered prayer to a father's quiet comfort. Why, you might wonder, does this old story still matter? Why spend so many words, so many hours, remembering agony, shame, and fear that most of us no longer know firsthand? The answer is both simple and profound, because the story is not over. The lessons of pain, the rituals of comfort, the silent promises to make things better, all of these are still working in our lives, shaping us in ways we don't always see. Think for a moment of your own childhood memories. Maybe it was the fear of the doctor, the smell of antiseptic, the way your parents squeezed your hand just a bit tighter as the nurse unwrapped a needle. Maybe it was the whispered warning, "Be brave," or "It will be over soon." The ache of anticipation, the small relief when it was done, the pride in having survived. These feelings are not new. They are echoes of 1,000 generations, lessons passed from one frightened heart to the next. And every small act of comfort, every soft word or gentle touch, is a link in the chain of healing that began long before any of us were born. In every community, the shadow of the past lingers in the present. There are places, even now, where dentistry is a luxury, where pain is endured in silence, where old remedies and old fears rule. For them, the history of agony is not a story but a reality. And for many of us, even in the most advanced societies, fear is a stubborn guest. It sits beside us in the waiting room, reminding us that the mouth is a place of vulnerability, that we are never as far from the old pain as we wish. This is not a weakness. It is a memory of survival. Fear kept our ancestors alive. Caution made them clever. It is only because they learned, because they taught and adapted, that we now enjoy the luxury of hope. Their pain was not for nothing. It bought us comfort, taught us empathy, showed us the value of kindness and the danger of neglect. Each generation took the tools handed down, herbs, prayers, iron, eventually science, and tried to make them better, safer, more humane. But there is another reason to remember. History is not just about suffering, but about the choices we make in response to it. Every time someone demanded better treatment, every time a healer listened instead of dismissing, every time a family gathered in support instead of turning away, a new chapter was written. Progress is built not on the bones of the defeated, but on the hope and determination of survivors, those who refused to accept agony as destiny. In this way, the story of dental pain is a parable for all pain, all struggle, all the places where life still hurts. It reminds us that nothing changes by itself. The end of torture, the coming of anesthesia, the rise of gentle care, these were not gifts from above, but victories won through grief, trial, and perseverance. The world bends toward kindness only when enough people decide that it must. When enough hands reach out to comfort and enough voices say, "No more." Today, the dentist's office is a place of relief for many, but the echoes remain. The nervous glance, the old joke, the gratitude for numbness or soft hands, these are the living fossils of a hard history. Every time a dentist reassures a patient, every time a child is told, "You'll feel only a little pinch," the old pain is honored and transformed. Every innovation, every act of care, is a rebellion against the darkness our ancestors knew. And yet the journey is unfinished. Around the world, there are still people who fear the dentist not out of superstition, but out of lived experience. Because for them, the barber's chair is real, the agony fresh, the cost of treatment too high. The lessons of history call us to do more, to share what we have learned, to widen the circle of comfort and care. Let's not forget, too, the power of stories. When you tell a child about the days before anesthesia, or listen to a grandparent recall their first real dentist, you are keeping the story alive. You are reminding yourself and those you love that comfort and relief are not guarantees but achievements. That fear is not shameful, but natural, a signal to be listened to, respected, and answered with compassion. In the end, the true legacy of all this pain is not the fear, but the strength it built. The strength to ask questions, to seek help, to keep looking for better ways. The willingness to comfort the fearful, to advocate for the forgotten, to never accept suffering as the only option. The courage to remember, not just the agony, but the hope that survived alongside it. So, as this story draws to a close, let yourself reflect for a moment. What has changed in your own life, in your family, in your community, because of this long history? How many quiet acts of care have you witnessed? How many times have you comforted or been comforted? How many stories have you heard about the old days? And how have they shaped your expectations, your courage, your gratitude? And then, perhaps, take a step further. Leave a comment, share your own memories or those of your loved ones. Did your grandmother have a trick for soothing toothache, a superstition, a prayer? Did you ever witness someone facing their fears and coming out stronger? Or maybe you are still afraid, still learning to trust the promise of painless care. All of these stories matter. All of them are worthy. The act of sharing, of speaking out, is itself a victory over pain, a way of saying, I have survived, I have learned. I want others to know they are not alone. In the long history of suffering, every voice of hope is a candle against the dark. And so, with gratitude for those who came before, with compassion for those still struggling, and with hope for all the days to come, let us honor the journey. Let us keep telling the story, not just of agony, but of courage, kindness, and the relentless will to make things better. Thank you for listening. Your story, your memory, your hope is now part of this long chain. May your days be gentle, your nights restful, and your smile a tribute to everyone who fought for a world where pain is not destiny, but a challenge that can, together, be overcome. Let's take these last steps together, letting the embers of this long, sometimes harrowing, sometimes inspiring journey glow in our shared silence. In every great story, the ending is not just a conclusion, but a threshold, a place where all that has come before is gathered, made sense of, and finally, gently, released. This is where pain is transformed into wisdom, fear into empathy, and memory into purpose. So imagine the world, just as it is tonight. In one city, a teenager sits scrolling her phone, barely noticing the appointment reminder for tomorrow's dental checkup. She is nervous, yes, but her fear is vague, almost weightless. A habit inherited from the past, softened by the knowledge that relief is close at hand. In another place, an old man sits in his kitchen, sipping tea, absently touching the gap in his smile left by a tooth lost in a different era. For him, the memory of pain is real, but the knowledge that his grandchildren will never know that same agony brings comfort, even pride. Elsewhere, a young parent soothes a frightened child before a first filling, whispering, "It's all right, you're safe, the doctor will be kind." The child does not know the stories of iron tongs or burning irons, but feels the reassurance in the parent's hands, the transmission of hope through generations, the living echo of 1,000 years of struggle and survival. And somewhere in the quiet night, a dentist packs away her tools, wipes down her chair, and thinks for a moment of those who came before her, barbers and bone setters and herbalists, remembering that every act of gentle care is a kind of tribute. This is why the story matters. It is not just a catalog of horrors, but a record of resilience, of the ways people faced what seemed impossible and decided to try anyway. the agony of medieval dentistry is more than just a curiosity for textbooks or trivia for nervous patients. It is a deep well of meaning, a testament to what happens when humanity refuses to let suffering define its destiny. Every scream, every tear, every desperate hope was not in vain. Each was a small brick in the road that led us here. The power of this memory is that it changes the way we see ourselves and each other. To know that our ancestors faced pain with so little help and still found reasons to hope, to comfort one another, to look for answers, this gives us strength. Their struggle is not just a shadow on our happiness. It is the foundation of our capacity for gratitude, for empathy, for the small acts of courage that make up a meaningful life. Consider the gift that lives inside your own smile. Every untroubled meal, every unbroken night of sleep, every laugh that comes without wincing is a tribute to those who had none of these things. Each is a promise to carry their story forward, not as a burden, but as a torch. Even our fears, the reflexive anxiety that tightens the chest in the waiting room or raises the pulse at the sound of a drill, are part of that inheritance. They are not weaknesses, but living memories, reminders of how precious comfort really is. But history does not ask us to wallow in old pain. Instead, it offers an invitation. Use what you've learned. Be kinder to yourself and to others. Remember that every person you meet carries invisible wounds, echoes of struggles you cannot see. Offer comfort, not judgment. Ask questions, listen for fear, share what helps. These are the legacies of the past, the rituals of healing made new, the language of hope rewritten for a world that still, sometimes, hurts. It is also a call to vigilance. Progress is precious, but never guaranteed. The comfort so many enjoy today is not yet universal. In many places, pain and fear are still routine companions. History warns us. Do not take this ease for granted. Do not allow old neglect to creep back in through the cracks of forgetfulness or indifference. Let your memory be a shield for others, your gratitude a force for change. Support those who work to bring gentle care where it is needed most. Speak up when you see suffering. Defend the right to relief and dignity for all. If you pause and look back, you will see not just the long shadow of suffering, but the lanterns carried by those who refused to surrender. The mother comforting her child with a bundle of sage. The barber who cleaned his tools just a little more carefully. The wandering healer who risked scorn to try something new. The first dentist to mix an anesthetic. The first patient to wake from a procedure without pain and smile through tears of disbelief. Every one of them is part of your story now. Maybe, as you listen, you recall your own moments of fear and relief. A time you sat trembling in a chair, or watched a loved one endure, or simply learned to trust that kindness could conquer even old terror. Maybe your memory is not of dentistry at all, but of some other pain, some other victory over the dark. All these stories belong together, forming a tapestry that is stronger and brighter than any thread alone. And so let this be your invitation, not just to remember, but to participate. Leave a comment, share your story, your fear, your gratitude, your hope. Let someone else find comfort in your courage, and let yourself draw strength from the knowledge that you are not, and never were alone. Tell us about a grandparent's remedy, a childhood terror, a doctor who made all the difference, a moment when you realized you had finally, truly survived. Each comment is a candle, a reminder that history is not dead. It is alive, breathing in all of us, shaping every smile and every gentle touch. In the end, to remember the history of pain is to honor the full range of what it means to be human. It is to recognize that every advance, every painless filling, every bright waiting room, every reassurance from a calm voice, is the result of countless lives lived bravely through suffering. It is to know that the strength to hope is not born in ease, but in hardship overcome. And it is, finally, to promise ourselves and each other that we will keep building on that legacy, choosing empathy over indifference, care over cruelty, courage over resignation. As the fire dies down and the story settles into the quiet of your heart, let its meaning linger. You have traveled far, through centuries of agony and resilience, and arrived at a place where hope is not just a dream, but a daily reality. Let that journey make you gentler, more grateful, more willing to share both comfort and courage. And if, someday, you find yourself afraid, whether in a dentist's chair or facing some other darkness, remember this long line of survivors and healers, the story that is now yours to carry and to tell. Remember that pain is not the end, but the beginning of strength. That the bravest thing is not to endure alone, but to reach out for help, to offer help, and to believe that relief, even when hard won, is always possible. Thank you for listening, for remembering, for being part of this journey. Your story, your compassion, your hope are the best medicine there is. So, what is your story? How has this history touched you or your family? What do you want the next generation to remember? Leave a comment below. Let your voice join the chorus of those who have faced pain and found, together, a way forward. Because this story is not over, and with every memory shared, every kindness offered, we write its next, brighter chapter.